This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1744, Book of the Month Club, Daredevil, Born Again. Welcome, one and all, as we re-inaugurate our Book of the Month Club format. I'm Chris Eberle.
I'm Kevin Moyer.
I'm Matt Murdock.
And I'm Shane Kelly.
God, I miss that music.
It's been quite a few months since the last time we had a book thereof.
Probably a couple of years, I'd say.
Yeah. Still divisible in the
still
months.
a couple of months.
Several dozen months.
Well, we've actually been teasing this topic for years in one form or another.
Years and years.
You recall when we did our series of Daredevil Spotlights, Kevin, I think that was 2013 and 14.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we talked about how we wanted to spend more time on Born Again. And we've been trying, as I'm sure many of our listeners know, as you get older, families, jobs, it's so hard logistically sometimes just to organize several people in one room.
Yeah.
And at least we're able to get four of us here. And Kevin, I have to say, if you weren't available, we wouldn't have done this.
Oh, jeez.
And that's
Well, I
because
appreciate that, but
you are one of the premier Daredevil fans. So
I remember when this was brought up. I mean, this has been batted around for probably a decade.
Yeah.
And
yeah, easily.
I literally thought, well, this is never going to come to fruition. It's one of these things that's just going to be an urban myth. But I'm glad it came to fruition, which obviously was in part, obviously, mostly by you, Chris, to follow through and make it all happen. So thank you for that, and thank you for including me and making sure that we could all do it together. So,
brother, you bet. And just quickly, I reread the story last night, and the reason why I wanted to do this for so many years is this remains, if I had to pick, like, you're on a desert island, what's the one comic book story you would have in your possession? It's this story.
wow. Yeah, without a doubt.
So, and just reading again last night, only reaffirm that. So I'm really excited to hear all the thoughts on the book, to talk about also in the context of Daredevil on TV now and how they sort of absorb parts of the story into the third season. Although you haven't seen that yet, have you, Murdock?
I have not.
Okay,
Neither have I.
We'll be careful not to spoil then when we kind of touch upon that.
Appreciate it.
Essentially. And just to hear everybody's thoughts on... I mean, this is not a term I use lightly. To me, this is a masterpiece in the comic book medium. And I really look, and in fact, I brought with me my black and white archive edition because, and I would recommend this to listeners if you can swing it, to see Mazzucchelli's art in black and white is, wow! It is a once in a lifetime, breathtaking treat, and you really appreciate what a great artist he was and is, especially because he hadn't been an artist professionally that long when he actually did Born Again, so. And you see his art actually grow and mature within those 6 or 7 issues of the story, too.
I mean, he was only on Daredevil for about a year before
Roughly.
this. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
roughly.
And we'll talk about that.
And you can see the progression. When you see the first couple issues he did up until the point when this takes off. I mean, he literally peaked.
Yeah,
Yep.
even within the course of this arc, you can see that.
Yeah.
So,
See, now that version there is the first one I ever owned of the story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
really?
I couldn't pass it up. I mean, I can't afford those much anymore, but when it first came out, I was like, oh, well, I've heard so much. I want to see it, and I'd love to see the original art. So, yeah, I bought the book.
Shane, I just got like a jolt of electricity right up the spine. Just, I'm envying the experience you had.
Yeah, it was cool.
That I can only imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, that book is so beautiful. I mean, it was just... I'm grateful they did that because, I mean, for a story that means so much to me, to see something different and unique and new with it, as soon as that came out, I was like, I gotta have that.
And I should point out to our listeners when we talk about collections, Kevin and I both brought, without planning, together, our 1987 trades. And this is when Marvel wasn't doing a lot of trades.
No.
So this is one of the early trades they did. It shows how they recognized, even this is only about a year or so after the story concluded in monthly format, they recognized how important it was, and they reprinted it.
Canonized instantly.
And I actually have it signed by both Miller and
That's
Mazzucchelli.
awesome. Well, you beat me there.
Yeah.
So
And I'll talk a little bit later about the story behind that, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Let's kind of start the way we do spotlights. Like, what's everyone's sort of like initial experience or impression of the Born Again story? Like when you first were exposed to it, just kind of give a little bit of context. We'll start with Murdock.
Okay, well, my first experience with this story was reading it to do this episode.
Wait, is this the first time you've read it?
Well, no, this rereading it
Okay,
for this
fair
is the
enough.
second time I've read it. The first
Okay.
time was a couple of years ago when we first discussed doing this episode, as Kevin referenced. This has been kind of an urban legend among CGS folks for a while now. There was even talk for a little while there of cooperating with Peter to do a footnotes version.
Yeah.
Which may yet still happen at some
I hope
point
so
Who knows?
one
Yeah,
day.
that'd be
in
awesome.
the far
still
future
do.
time.
Sure.
It's what we can but keep hoping and looking to the future. But yeah, so a couple of years ago, I read this for the first time in this trade edition,
yes.
which I believe you put into my hands,
Yes.
Chris. I think you procured
That was the
this,
version that
during
was available in stores for quite a few years, that printing.
Fifth printing 2015,
Yep.
it says.
Wow.
So which includes actually some rough
cool.
art here from
Layouts,
Mazzucchelli, some script pages from Frank Miller, and even the complete contents of Daredevil number 226.
Which we're going to talk about, and it's good they put that because that story is
Yeah.
very important, actually, as a
Right.
setup.
Quote, presented here for the sake of completeness.
Exactly.
It did
Yeah.
provide some good context. So, yeah, that's, I really had no prior history with this story. I got to tell you guys, I'm kind of like Shane here in that I came for this episode mainly to listen to the two of you holding forth, two virtuosi on the subject of Miller studies, holding forth here about this
Just
classic.
setting yourself up for disappointment.
I'm not disappointed so far. And
Or us being incredibly
I don't believe I
long-winded.
will be. But yeah, to be perfectly honest, Miller has never been one of my favorite creators.
That I knew, yeah.
Yeah, but that's based mainly on some of his later stuff that he did for DC. And I got to say, I enjoyed this more than I did a lot of his DC work, including Dark Knight Returns.
Okay.
Because Miller had not become quite so much Miller as he would later be. What I see when I read this, I'm kind of two minds about it. You know, as a fanboy, this is not the first thing that I would reach for if I were looking for a piece of light entertainment. But then again, it was never really intended to be any such thing. The spandex quotient is just too low, you know, for my general reading tastes.
Oh, it's very low.
But shifting gears from fanboy to scholar, I can't help but be overwhelmed by the skill with which Miller executes this dark, dreary, depressing crime fiction story he's setting out to tell. He's very obviously drawing heavily on the writing style of old hard-boiled detective writers like Hammett and Chandler.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and self-consciously so. He's drawing some pretty chilling character studies here. And everybody gets equal time. It's I liken it to like the climax of a grand tragic opera. Like it becomes more polyvical as it goes on. Everybody gets their little Arioso passages. The Kingpin, Ben Urich, Foggy, and Gloria O'Brien, Karen, Matt, all those people, and a couple of other minor players along the way. We even get a little bit of Melvin Potter in here, hence the importance of issue 226.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really gripping stuff. I'm reminded of one of my favorite creator quotes from Matt Fraction a little while ago, and his take on the creation of modern superhero comics was, quote, "The job is to break all the toys and then put them back together again as artfully as possible." And if that is indeed the job of writing modern superhero comics, Frank Miller pretty much wrote the employment manual with this story right here, because that's exactly what he does here. He deconstructs Daredevil, strips away all of his conventional elements through the agency of the Kingpin, and strips him down to his core essence, which is just simply an unstoppable urban force, a man who refuses to quit, who always gets back up again no matter what.
Never give up. Yep.
Never
That's what
surrender.
I'm saying.
I knew you were, Shane, and if Matt were here, he would have beaten me to that, I think. Galaxy Quest. So it's a great piece of pulp fiction, and even if it's not my favorite genre, I can't help but be impressed at what a well constructed example of said genre this is. One criticism I bring to bear on it is that it feels like it kind of swings into a completely different genre in the final couple of chapters. I feel like the arrival of Nuke derails things somewhat.
We can talk about that because I understand where you're coming with that.
I can see what you say
I can
by
see
that.
what
Sure.
you're saying.
Yeah, it's-
Absolutely.
Still a good story, but it just feels like it's a part of a different story grafted onto what he'd been telling to that point. But of course, it was being published serially, monthly, so there's time for his focus to slip or to be shifted by editorial influence. Who knows? Well, actually, you might have some quotes to that effect.
Yeah, I can talk about that. In a little
Excellent,
bit.
excellent. But yeah, I was fairly impressed. A little depressed, but impressed.
Yeah. Shane, how about you, brother?
Well, my first exposure was probably sitting around before CGS was in my basement or somebody's basement talking about what our favorite stories were, and I'm sure this came up and I had no idea what anybody was talking about because I never read it. I read it about a year, maybe 2 years ago for the first time. I'm blown away by the art. It was much heavier of a read than I thought it would be, but that's my naivety about the subject. But I did enjoy it thoroughly. I agree with Adam. It's not something that I would go to grab and read just on a whim to have fun. It's not that kind of story.
No, it's not fun.
I wouldn't give it to somebody and say, hey, this is a great story if you want to get into reading comic. No, I think there's other things you got to read before you get to that. But it was a great story, and I was very impressed. I often marvel at any creator, but Frank Miller included, where when they're writing it, are they writing it just because it's something they want to tell, aside from whatever editorial things they're being told to do with the story, the characters, whatever. But when they're writing it, do they ever realize just how phenomenal it's going to turn out? Do they realize just how revered it's going to be? Or even have an inkling, well, man, this really means a lot to me. I hope people take it the same way. And then to have them do that must blow people away. It just must be an awesome
That's a
feeling.
great question and point. And one thing I would say, just to add it, because you both brought up editorial, because I did some background reading. Ralph Macchio was... No, we don't mean the Karate Kid. We mean the longtime Marvel editor and...
Long-time Daredevil editor.
Yep. And I read some quotes from him. Back issue 21 did a nice sort of retrospective on this period of Daredevil. And they interviewed him, and he said in no uncertain terms, he said, I did not direct the story really at all. He said he had actually, because Denny O'Neil had been writing the book, as you mentioned, Kevin, for about a year, and he was leaving. And Macchio called Miller, because Miller had already done his seminal run prior to this with Elektra and so forth. And he asked Miller, do you want to come back? And after a brief consideration, he did. And Macchio said, I'm paraphrasing it, but he said, I love what they were doing. And Frank would run some things by me, but everything is what they wanted to do. So he clearly did not, there was not an editorial heavy hand in this at all, based on what I read in that interview.
Wow.
So.
Yeah.
Thank you for putting our minds at ease there, Chris.
And I'm very much like Adam said, I'm here to listen to you guys wax about it
I mean, I had...
lovingly.
I couldn't find it, but I swear I read somewhere, maybe you can confirm this as well, but I swear I read an article about Frank Miller about this story, and from what I recall is that literally at this point in his life, he was in New York. He had been in New York for a period of time. I guess maybe about 5 years or so, and I understood that literally at this point in his life he was somewhat broke, and
I don't know, actually. I haven't heard that much.
yeah, it was something. And I swear I remember reading it somewhere. I'm sure somebody can confirm it. I couldn't find anything prior to this episode to confirm that, but I swear I remember reading a story that he was literally in his apartment, like broke, and going through his own emotional things. Like literally he was sitting in the bathtub, just experiencing whatever he was experiencing, and somehow this is how was the beginning of this story. That's how, so it was kind of a cathartic thing for him. But
well, I just looked up Miller's birthday, so he was around 30 when he crafted this story. So
because this is before Dark Knight Returns.
no, it's after.
No, it's not.
Is it?
He did Dark Knight Returns after this.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
That was 86, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so
this
it started
came
in
out.
85. You're
Yeah.
right.
This.
You're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I mean, so he had not, other than his
Daredevil
run.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know what I mean? This isn't what the Miller that we know now and appreciate. As for all his accomplishments. This was like, the next step for him after his seminal run of Daredevil. Because Ronin was something he did, which was it was good, but it just was never widely revered. But this kind of like really set him in a completely different direction. Like you can start, I'll talk about it later. There's some of the things you can kind of see the underpinnings that he still played with after this, especially in Dark Knight Returns. But That's my understanding, and like I said,
Yeah.
hopefully I can either find it myself or somebody else has read and heard the similar story. But that's just my understanding. But anywho,
Do either of you know if Miller was offered the chance to draw this as well as write it, or was it going to be Mazzucchelli all the way?
Have I been mispronouncing his name all these years?
Mazzucchelli.
I always say Mazzucchelli.
That's what I was told it was.
Yeah,
I used to say Mazzucchelli all the
Yeah.
time, and then somebody corrected me, and it is
Well-
Mazzucchelli.
Well, that's what I would have thought too. That for like the CCH in Italian is usually k.
Yeah.
But I think I saw someplace, it might just have been his Wikipedia entry that it was pronounced Mazzucchelli. So let me just turn to the computer screen here for a
and
moment.
see what's up. But I remember I used to say Mazzucchelli all the time, and then somebody's like, no, it's Mazzucchelli, And I think
we'll
there was
find
some sort of those phonetically things where they
Yeah.
broke down creators' names, and I thought there was something in regards to that. But anyway,
Yeah, I always thought it was
but no, my understanding
Mazzucchelli.
was that it was never even a discussion if Miller was going to draw it.
They asked him to come back and write because Mazzucchelli was the penciler, and apparently, from what I read, Miller clearly appreciated and saw Mazzucchelli's talent and potential.
Right.
And if you note in the story, on the credits pages, they just say by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. There's no breaking down between writer and artist in the credits.
Oh wow, yeah.
And that shows that to me that's indicative of the collaborative
Well, there's
rhythm they got going.
the quote in the back of the original trade is by Frank Miller, and it said it's almost criminal how easy David makes it to write the script. He makes a three-dimensional stage of the individual panel, complete and authentic detail, nonetheless uncluttered and utterly readable. He creates actors whose dramatic range is startling, whose best and most compelling moments are wordless. He's talked of writing his own comics. Keep an eye out for them. I will. So shows, Frank's admiration for
Yeah.
Dave's talents, Those are, strong words.
And Mazzucchelli was born in 1960. I just looked up his birthday, so he was in his mid-20s when he was doing this work on Daredevil. So and Miller was about 30. So I'm glad you reminded me, Kevin. I totally brain farted because Dark Knight is definitely after this. And
Yeah,
that's
it's
important.
almost right after it.
Yeah.
Yep, you can kind of see an evolutionary step being taken towards the Miller of Dark Knight Returns in Nuke when he shows up.
Yeah.
The turn the story takes at that point kind of made me think of the Dark Knight for a couple of reasons.
So Kevin, what are some of your initial thoughts? Or
I
impressions?
mean, I was
Context.
I got I bought the books when they came out.
Yeah, me too.
I was I remember in Lem's store on 5th and Spring when this came out, and I remember the promotional poster, and actually I still have it. He gave it to me.
Nice.
I had asked him, he had laminated it onto a piece of cardboard, and it's the one where it's Daredevil's gloved hands holding the ripped DD in his hands, and it just said Apocalypse now, Daredevil 227, And I literally ended up buying at least one other version of it that I have that I, saved that. I love that image, especially after I read the whole story. I mean, when it first came out, actually, I was just kind of like started to read it, and I was just like, But it was when I sat and read the whole story all at one shot is where it really kind of knocked me off my feet, so to speak. And I was just, after reading his original run on Daredevil, I mean, to me, this is a culmination of everything
I agree.
he's set up, up to this point. There's no hand in this, the hand, you know what I mean? And just total crime noir and just such an incredible story. And all the characters, like Murd said, every one of them is poignant and everybody has, means something, and they all have time. They all have an impact to the story. It's so laid out and so spread out. It's not just one main focal character, literally. I mean, and I loved how, he brought back Karen Page, which was, a lost character for how many years? Everybody
And boy,
kind of
did he-
forgot
boy, did he
about
bring
her.
her back,
Oh my
too.
God, yeah. It's like,
Oh, God.
I can look back now and akin it to, like an Ed Brubaker Bucky, kind of thing. You know what I mean? This was just a character that just people forgot. It's like, she had gone to California in like issue 60 something, and then he had revisited at one point when he had gone to Hollywood for Daredevil.
The
went
last
to
time she
California.
appeared was sometime in the early Bronze Age,
Yeah.
something like that.
So I mean, this is a long time that this
Yeah.
character had never appeared and nobody ever had addressed her. So that was something for me as a fan, was like, wow, what a cool thing to do, but what a compelling and experience for me as a fan of the character.
Do you think it was risky to do back then?
Oh, I believe totally so. I mean, I can, for me as a comic reader, like before this, the only thing I can compare it to was like reading The Death of Gwen Stacy.
Okay.
You know, it was something that completely, you know, off the hook. You know, something that totally didn't expect. Totally, extremely well executed. And it meant something.
Yeah, and not just, and you make a good point about the execution, because not just the fact that he brought Karen back, but the way he brought her back. And he did tie into the fact that back in those 70s comics, yeah, she was starting to pursue, like trying to start a film career.
Yeah, she moved out to Hollywood to be an actress.
And then you see, in our time, however many years later, much shorter, of course, in the Marvel time slide, what happened to her. And, you know, how that, and she says several times the story, like, you know, every movie was like a little bit less than, you know, what it should have been. And it basically degraded until she became, you know, one guy said, you're popular at the stag parties, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how she ended up.
Yeah. I mean, he holds nothing back in this.
No.
At all. You know, with any character, it's all no holds barred.
Yep.
You know, and I love it. It's so raw.
Yep.
And, but I mean, you know, it's a dark story, don't get me wrong, but it's a very, to me, uplifting story. I mean,
ultimately, it is an uplifting story.
I mean, I am not underselling this in any way, shape, or form. But this book literally saved my life at one point in my life, and that I just say just in the essence that just goes to show that anything, you know, that is means something. But yeah, I was in, you know, I just started my own business, ended up having a severe accident. My ex-employer had screwed up all my insurance paperwork, so I wasn't covered. I couldn't get any money. I was out of work for 7 months and being self-employed with no money and having, you know, 5-digit hospital bills and no way out. You know, it was just one of those times where I literally used to have panic attacks where the phone would ring because everybody's calling looking for money and I had no answer, you know, and I was literally in a place where I was just like, this is no way to live. And you know, I was like, I don't know what to do anymore, and I literally was at a point where I was like, you know, I'm ready to check out. You know, this is just not something. And I remember I literally what I did to survive. I literally was on a daily basis just decided to ignore life and just started reading. And at the time, comics. It was like in 1998 when that happened, and comics for me were it's not strong for me at that time. I was literally reading the prose novels. And I was getting more enjoyment out of that. So literally that was my day, to wake up in the morning, grab a novel, and read.
Wow.
And that's what I would do every day. And I would just ignore the phone and just read. And for some point, like I said, it got to a point after like 3 months of it, I was just, you know, like I didn't see no end, you know. And then I remember just, for some reason, I reached for this and read this. And it just changed my whole perspective. I was just like, you know what? If Matt can do it, I can do it. And it just put me, I don't know, you can, I just from revisiting this again in the past, you know, day or so, I still get that same uplifting feeling, you know, going through these pages and seeing what happened to Matt and seeing him come back and you know, retrieving himself and recreating himself. And it still gives me kind of chills, you know, it still gives me, you know, an excitement and invigorance, you know. So talk about poignancy and things have meaning. There's always something that means something to someone.
Yeah.
So I do not, you know, understate it. That's how important this story is to me. So I already enjoyed it to begin with, but this has a whole different.
Right, because when you were going through that tough time, you had it as a trade. You just picked it up again.
Yep,
After
I just
all
picked
these
up
years.
trade
Okay.
and read all the issues right in a row, and I was just like, wow, you know, look what he went through, and he picked himself back up, and he, you know, started over again, and I was like, if he can do it, I can do it. This is a character that obviously meant a lot to me, so it was something that was significant to me. He, you know, it was like a light that I needed to see at the time. So as it's dark as it is, you know, for me, it's a very enlightening story. So
I can certainly relate to that with my love of Starman. That's for sure.
yeah.
Wow.
That's a book we have to discuss in detail down the road on this program, Shane. Absolutely.
You, Chris?
So, like you, Kevin, I was reading Daredevil monthly when this came out. I hadn't been reading Daredevil that long monthly, but I was getting it monthly. I was 12. And I'd read a lot of Daredevil back issues up to this point. I read all the older Miller stuff. I read, you know, wacky Bronze Age stuff, you know, with Moondragon and all that. I read a lot of the classic Silver Age. So I'd read a lot of Daredevil, even that young point in my life. but nothing prepared me for this story. And it awoke a sensibility in me as a reader that as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate how much this book and a handful of others that we've mentioned in other programs over the years, the impact it had on me, because it made me realize the possibilities in comic book scripting that I hadn't fully been exposed to before. Because again, like a lot of like we mentioned, books like Watchmen, Dark Knight, V for Vendetta, go down the list, Swamp Thing. A lot of those books I didn't read until they were out in trade when I was a little bit older. This story I read as it was coming out on the newsstand. And again, I was pretty well versed in Daredevil, and to see what happens to the character in this story and how, as you mentioned, he's completely, his life is destroyed, essentially.
In one issue.
Yeah, in one issue, yeah. Like he says, like all before coffee, like he gets the IRS, the whole 9 yards. And to see what he goes through, and I didn't know what crime noir was yet as a 12-year-old. I didn't know writers like Dashiell Hammett, like Murd mentioned, or Raymond Chandler, who I've since read as an adult. So I didn't fully appreciate where Miller was drawing from. But his captions were so compelling in this story. The way he would describe the action and the mindset. And you made a great point, Kevin. Each character is so well delineated through the narrative captions. You don't see narrative captions much in comics anymore. They're kind of passed away. Yeah. This is, I think, one of the best examples of using that type of device for storytelling, because and for me, the best example is how he captures the Kingpin in this story. Because, look, the Kingpin's been around since Spider-Man 50 or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. He's a Silver Age character. And Miller kind of made him very central in Daredevil's world in his first run with Elektra and all that. But then, my God, in this story, he takes a character that we all know. He still has him, like, doing the workouts with the thugs, and, right. he's still sensitive about his wife. All those things are still there. But it's now taken to this like kind of like with Karen Page, this level of realism and sinister feelings and brutality that as a kid I was just totally floored by. Like, again, as you get older, you read the story over and over again, you start to realize, he's delineating a character who, he's evil. Like, this is someone who is so profoundly convinced of what he's doing is to his benefit, and probably in his own mind to those around him, that he's going to do whatever he has to do. And the way he captures the Kingpin, for me, is one of the real takeaways I have from this book, because, like, when you see Vincent D'Onofrio as the Kingpin, he read this book.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Like, this is what he's basing his performance on.
Yeah, he's so maniacal. Question. Yeah,
So this is a story that I've read it probably hundreds of times since 1985, 1986. And each time I read it, like you, Kevin, I get that chill. That there's certain scenes where certain times comic book stories, they sort of leave the form and they become myth. And there are moments in this book where that happens, where I get such a chill, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on. One of the reasons why I have that feeling is this story for me is still one of the greatest portrayals of Captain America I've ever seen in a comic book. That I think captures the essence of Captain America literally in a few panels, basically. Yeah. So there's much to talk about, and I'm just thrilled we're doing this, because this means a great deal.
Yeah, the thing that was different for me is that even though it's a Daredevil comic, and I've read a lot of Daredevil up to this point, but when I after a couple times reading this, for me, what I came about is like this. Like, Matt Murdock is a hero of this story, to me. Granted, he, reclaims his title as Daredevil at the end of the story, and, makes his comeback and, does what he does. This is a spoiler-free episode, right? So, yeah. But anyway. But to me, that's, to me, he's the hero of the book. Matt's the hero of the book, which was something... the way I looked at it, that was just another element, another layer, that made, this character and this title, so poignant for me. I've never read anything like that up to this point that made me look at a character that way, and So that's one thing that I really take away from it that I really loved about it.
And Murray made the good point before, and to piggyback on that is that there's a very low, tights quotient in this story.
Yep. I noticed that from issue 228 all the way through to the final splash at number 232, there's not a single image of Matt in the costume. So you're right, Kevin. This is really much more a Matt story than a Daredevil story.
Yeah.
It's pretty daring back in 1980s.
And even when they kind of remind you, hey, it's the Marvel Universe, and the Avengers appear just briefly in the penultimate issue when there's that big Donnybrook in Hell's Kitchen, and they're drawn to the mayhem. Even the way they're shown, they don't even mention Thor's name. They just say, a voice that can command a god.
Yeah,
They just
that
show
was the
you
panel.
Thor in shadow, basically.
Yeah.
And Iron Man is there as basically a servant of the federal government, which is a role he's returned to again and again in various ways.
Yeah.
And that character. And that's also where I think the story is also in many ways, when we get to that latter part of it, it's also a Captain America story in ways that I think are very significant.
Well, one thing I noticed, again, I always end up finding something new,
Absolutely.
a little, and the last issue, if you look at the title page,
It's dedicated to Jack Kirby.
dedicated Jack
Yep.
Kirby, and I was like, for some reason, it was just something that I must have oversaw it.
Yep.
Before.
And he was still living then.
Yeah.
It was in 1986.
And I was just like, wow, that's cool, And now I get it, because it's like, obviously, that issue, what little bit that Cap appears and the significance, and how powerful Frank writes him. And it was just, I was moved by that,
Yeah, me too. Let me give you just a little bit of background on how we kind of get to this story. So, I'm sure many listeners are familiar with the fact that Frank Miller had already made his name on Daredevil in the late 70s. We did a whole series of spotlights on Daredevil in 2013 and 2014. Isn't Miller from Vermont?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, okay. So he comes to Manhattan and he gains work at Marvel. And you can find other Frank Miller work that he did, like odd covers and pinups in that early period. But eventually he's put on Daredevil with the classic issue 158. Roger McKenzie is the scripter at that point. And as we mentioned, Miller brings a film noir, a crime noir sensibility to Daredevil, especially when he starts working with inker Klaus Janson, who cannot his role is very important in all this as well. Right. And the book starts to take on a tone that was very different from the Daredevil stories that had preceded it in many ways. And then Miller starts to script the book as well as pencil it with Janson inking. And he starts to focus on Daredevil's relationship with the city. The city becomes a very important character in these stories, and also his relationship to the underworld. And in that first Miller run, some supervillains appear, but it's really more about him dealing with the underworld, Josie's bar, the stool pigeons,
Right.
His relationship,
Turk and
the relationship with the police, the press, and the form of Ben Urich, and so forth and so on.
organized crime.
Yeah, and then then Miller starts to elevate the Kingpin in a way that we've never seen before, and of course Elektra, as you mentioned, and these are classic stories that many listeners are familiar with. And he leaves the book after issue 191, that very famous issue where Matt goes into Bullseye's hospital room after Bullseye's been crippled,
Right.
and he basically plays Russian roulette with him. Now, that's issue 191. Now, Murd mentioned issue 226, and I didn't realize that. I'm glad they put that in that 2015, you said?
Right.
Edition, because Denny O'Neil had been scripting the book maybe about a year. And he does Denny O'Neil's a great writer. It's some really interesting stories, like that Micah Sin character who pops up,
Yeah.
and Matt's develops a relationship with Gloriana O'Brien, who's from Northern Ireland.
He did an awesome Vulture story.
Yes, that Vulture story was great. So there's good stuff there. O'Neill is leaving, and Mazzucchelli has been penciling these stories. And if you read the introduction, the introduction in the IDW Archive edition, Mazzucchelli writes a lengthy introduction in that book. He talks about where his career, because he just started his career essentially in the early 1980s, and he started to work on Daredevil. And you start to see, as you mentioned, the progression in those early issues, and then especially more so when you get into the Born Again stories, which he also inks, by the way. He's penciling and inking
Correct.
these stories. But issue 226, Miller scripts over O'Neill's plot. And I would urge listeners, if you've never read Born Again, or if you want to reread it, read this issue. Go on Marvel Unlimited to get the back issue. Read this story again, because they're established that Matt's starting to get unhinged. Now let's think about what's happened to him. Elektra died in his arms in issue 181, which in the context of these stories isn't that long ago.
No.
He has the whole final showdown with Bullseye. Then Heather Glenn commits suicide. She was another former girlfriend. Issue 220. She commits suicide in issue 220, and Foggy and Matt find her hanging.
All right.
So now think about in our own lives, you were just talking about a very tough period you're going through. When you're feeling besieged to the point that you feel like there's kind of no way out, that's going to have an impact on your mental disposition and just your perspective on things. So now we have Matt, who is this crime fighter, whose two very important women have died. He feels responsible in some form or another. His law firm is going under. His relationship with Foggy is strained. And if you read the dialogue and like the thought balloons and the captions in issue 226, he's in this mindset where he's starting to feel like everybody's against him.
Yeah.
And like people are taking him for granted. And he's like starting to question, like, why am I wasting my time like trying to save people? Like, you've seen these types of things before, like Spider-Man is a great example, but this is really dark because people have died.
Right.
You know, he almost feels like Heather's death is partially his fault. I mean, she was unhinged and had drinking issues, and she's a whole other character, but he's in bad shape going into Born Again. And the Kingpin gains information where he realizes not just who Matt Murdock is, but what Matt Murdock's mental state is. And he then pounces, essentially. So again, read issue 226.
I wish they would have included it in this thing, but I'd never, up until I don't remember exactly, might have been around that time or whatever, but I never really put that into context, reading that issue 226.
Yeah, because if you just read the book, you're like, was he like happy-go-lucky like the issue before? And they do take the time to establish he's in trouble. Like there's things are starting to deteriorate. And I mean, you think about it. Think about maybe 189. Like he's clutching Elektra's grave on the cover. Like they try to he digs up her body. Right. I mean, he's the man. The man is in bad shape.
I mean, you think about it. I mean, Elektra only lasted for like 13 issues.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was somebody that brought back that was such a significant character for him, and then she was taken away again. So that really, took a toll, and then everything that transpired up into that. And like you said, there's a lot of stuff that had transpired in that short run up to this book that, again, was unique in any comic book before, And
what's so compelling from a reader standpoint is, and you appreciate even more now looking back at, they took the time to both acknowledge that and also acknowledge in different callbacks that all these things have happened to him, and now here's the cumulative effect of these events, and now you're going to see that right here. And then you're going to have someone like the Kingpin who is utterly ruthless, who realizes, okay, this guy, I just got to push him over a little bit and he's finished. So this is not, when we think about the 80s and like the grim and gritty, right? And there's so many examples that some are great, many mediocre to poor. This is on a very high level here. What's happening?
And like I said, you think about all the things that came right after this. Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen. All these things that are seminal comic runs, and this, prefaced all that. So.
And I wanted to point out just the full creative team. We mentioned that Miller, of course, is the scripter and plotter. Mazzucchelli was also obviously contributing to the plots through his art, and he's penciler and inker. Christy Scheel, I think, did a wonderful job with the coloring in the book. The coloring in the book, I think, is a very important aspect of the story. Now, of course, 1980s coloring isn't going to be what it is today.
Right.
But I think she did a fantastic job. Joe Rosen lettering is very important in this story because he uses a different font. Like Ben Urich's font in this story so perfectly captures like that newsroom typewriter feel as he's telling you his version of what's going on. So this is a story where also the lettering we often overlook lettering, plays a very key role in how we experience the narrative. Of course, Ralph Macchio is the editor, and as I'm sure you know, Kevin, he did an introduction in this version.
Yeah, he did.
And in the interviews I read, Macchio was like, Frank ran everything by me, but this was their story, and I was basically not getting in their way. Like he was he wanted Miller to come back, and we have to remember Miller's already had all this gravitas from the first Daredevil run. I think you used the right word. Now it's the culmination of everything.
And you know, I give the utter respect to Ralph Macchio because I mean, you know, his run as editor on Daredevil lasted over 15 years, I think.
Wow.
Because he was also the editor of Man Without Fear.
Oh.
You know what I mean? So he was involved in a lot of significant Daredevil. You know, so I mean,
I'm going to read a quote from him from back issue 21. He's talking about Mazzucchelli. David's growth as an artist was phenomenal. Born Again just came visually alive in his hands. Imagine getting those pages, though.
oh my goodness.
For the first time.
Well, yeah, especially when you get the Artifact edition.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And nothing against Christy, is it Shield? I don't know how you
I think it's
pronounce
Shield,
it.
I think. Forgive me if it's not.
I mean, she, you know, with the abilities of the colors, because this is where they started doing the solid colors. You know, they changed. Marvel had changed their coloring, and so there were more distinct colors on the pages, and they're bright and vibrant. But she really does set a good mood in this. But until you see the black and white pages, I mean, that just blows me away. I was like, I wish they would have just, you know, I'm glad they did that because that would be awesome to see, because it adds to that noir feel to it. You know, it's like there's such a moodiness to.
Yep.
And that's what, you know, Mazzucchelli captured in Daredevil, even up to this, as well as including this. That a lot of the issues, he set a real a mood, an atmosphere with his artwork. That one issue with the fog, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was just beautiful. I mean, so he just literally, you know, came off the charts when in growth with this.
And what's
character.
interesting about his work is that as you go, and then you think about what he did with Batman Year One.
Yes.
With Miller after this. And I mean this in the best possible way, his work becomes more and more simplified.
Exactly.
In that he can capture so much with just a quick few strokes. Like, look at the classic cover here where you have the stained glass windows, and he captures each key character in a different pane glass. They're not very detailed drawings.
No.
But each character is perfectly delineated in terms of sort of their role in the story. I mean, you think about where his art is at the end of this and then in Year One, which is after this. I mean, it's hard. I think it's sometimes it's hard for us to appreciate how hard it is to do that type of artwork where it's not cluttered up, where it's not, you know, 1,000 pouches and belts and all these different things.
Yeah.
It's very simple, but
And
it's
hyper-detailed and all that.
so compelling.
Yeah.
And you get that throughout more and more throughout this story as well. Now, Shay, I know you have to leave in the relatively near future, so let's hear from you. Like, what, having read this a couple times, you said, right?
Once.
Okay.
Once.
So, what's kind of your general takeaway from it?
It was much heavier a story. I said it earlier, much heavier story than what I was expecting. I sort of went along with what I guess maybe Murd thought. I was looking for more Daredevil in it. I was surprised at how little there was and what effect it had on Matt throughout the story, and just how low he was, how destroyed he was, and how close he was to falling over the edge and never coming back from it. I know at the time I read it, I was watching, I think, the second season of Daredevil on Netflix, and some things that happened in that, and I want to say Jessica Jones, made sense when I was reading this, the first Jessica Jones, because I'm like, oh, well, I know who that is, I know who this is. Like, going through it, it was neat for me.
Well, yeah, because Nuke appears in Jessica Jones.
Right, I'm
yeah.
like, oh my God, okay, I get that. There was just some added bonus for me watching those things and wondering, all right, well, that's so-and-so, but then reading this going, oh my God, that's who that is. It really was so much more, in a good way, a time-consuming story to take your time and read through. Very heavy in what it was telling you, and I just didn't expect that. I thought, oh, Daredevil, it's going to be a Daredevil story, and it was not. It was anything but. It was quite a ride.
So I take it you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah. But now I want to look up that issue that you all just talked
The
about.
226. Yeah.
I never equated that as part of this. I never even gave it a thought to try and look that up before I read it.
I hadn't read it in years, and I just reread it yesterday to prep for this, and I had forgotten how important it really is in terms of context.
Now,
So-
with Denny O'Neil taking over for Frank Miller before, did he continue themes that Frank started to lead this to be the culmination, or did they just... He told his own story and then...
Well, I think Jansen did some writing first, if I remember correctly. I think Klaus Jansen wrote a few issues.
Yeah, I have
Okay.
to clarify that
Yeah,
myself,
I'd
but
have to I don't have to look that up. And
Yeah.
then O'Neill came in.
I didn't get that feeling when I was reading Denny O'Neill's stories that It didn't feel like an extension,
Okay.
in essence, of Frank Miller's stuff. Like he was telling his own stories.
Okay.
A lot of them were one-issue stories, and so it's like, I mean,
He wasn't ignoring
Right.
history.
Yeah.
He was giving his own sort of take on the and those stories are overall very good.
They
I
are.
recommend them
Because to me that's just more wonderful of how he ended his run, bringing that previous issue before this started to get him to this point so that the next story can be told in such a way with with Frank Miller.
And we have to remember Denny O'Neil was a great editor for many years, so I'm sure that sensibility also informed him plotting and then Miller writing over that, so there could be that
because
transition.
he was the editor of Daredevil, wasn't he? At some point,
I think so.
I think he was. So I think he had a history with the character, and then
Yeah.
and then had an opportunity to write as well.
Someone could correct us if we're wrong,
But I mean, some of the stories he told were just stories to me as a Daredevil reader. When I started reading Denny O'Neil stories, were just kind of like, they were so different. And again, like 1-issue, 2-issue story arcs and stuff but they, were things that I thought I wouldn't probably, enjoy, and I actually did thoroughly enjoy. And I think Dave Mazzucchelli was a part of that as well. I think because of the combination, I think I did enjoy them more so because of their combination. And then, of course, this was just a culmination of all that. But and also you have to take into consideration that Frank did come back and wrote issue 219.
with John Buscema.
Yes,
right?
with John
Yeah,
Buscema.
that's right.
And so I mean, while it doesn't tie into this, but it's also a very good single issue read, and that was Frank's return to the character after a period of time. So. I recommend picking that one up and reading that as well. But yes, it doesn't, I don't want to imply that it has a connection to this. It doesn't, but it's just, kind of a footnote thing, a side-by thing. But, But I, for me, what got me into Daredevil, I had read a couple issues here and there, and then I remember starting to pick up the Frank Miller run, and, I started going. I forget what issue was that when it was coming out monthly, but then I went back and bought the 158, 159, 160, and started buying those and reading those. And I know I've stated on this show before is that 163 is the one that hooked me. I was reading all these stories, and they were good stories. Roger McKenzie, I loved, what he had done with the book. And then I read 163, and when it was him fighting the Hulk, that's what sold me on the character of Daredevil. It was like, here's this guy going against this, unstoppable force, and he doesn't quit. He keeps trying. He keeps, and
goes back to Daredevil 8 with Submariner.
Yeah, and I was like, wow, this character is awesome. There's just something about this character that has such an essence and a core about him that makes him, and is so uniquely different. And I just fell for him. And you get that same sort of, kind of similar type of character.
Well, they establish his ties to his father, to the gym, to being a fighter, a
Right.
boxer,
Yeah.
and how never quit.
So it's again,
Never
it's
give up.
expansion onto that. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's what I loved about it. It's just like it just keeps building. Like everything built to this point, and then he just like,
Yep.
built the penthouse. This is the penthouse to the whole Daredevil building. And it's just like that's why I say culmination is the key for me in this. Is that there's so many things that culminated in this story run. That
And that have informed the character. Ever
yeah,
since.
it's just phenomenal.
Shane, I wanted to point something because I know you appreciate this story
Yeah.
before you go. So, as I said, I have Miller and Mazzucchelli's signatures, and there was a Comic-Con in the 90s in New York City. It was like a one-off con. I remember what it was called. And they had an incredible array of artists there. Like John Romita Sr. was there, Barry Windsor Smith, on and on. And Miller was there. So I got online with some buddies to wait for him. Like Ryan was there. And I remember the man in front of me, classic comic show, like he clearly hadn't bathed. I remember when he leaned over, like just the festering ass crack and the smell of like cheese was horrific. It always stayed with me, that stench. But it's part of, I guess, being home in that kind of world. But Miller,
You sound like Miller is describing.
Yeah, exactly.
Got
So
that knack for evocative sensory dialogue there.
Yeah.
Imagine if you had Matt Murdock's sense of
flatter
smell.
me, sir. Oh my God, I would have keeled over for that person. But so Miller arrived, and this is like he was doing Sin City at this point and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this trade. I waited online. I came up to him and I said, I really appreciate how you're speaking out against censorship, because that was a big thing he was doing.
Right.
Yeah.
CBLDF and so forth. And he took the book And he looked at it, and he held it up to the audience, the whole crowd, and he said, "This is how a comic book should look," because it was worn.
Well read.
And
Oh, yeah,
well
yeah.
read.
That
He
is
said, "What's your
awesome.
name?" And then he signed it. I was like, "Oh wow!" No,
I think I was. I think that was a show. Was it like '93 or something like that?
yeah.
Because I remember I met him at that show as well, and I think that was a show in New York where one of his like the Great Eastern Convention, whatever it was,
Well,
and that's
it
'cause
might have
there was
been
no Marvel or DC there.
Because the only other clue I have as to what the show was is that Preacher just come out, and the late great Steve Dillon was there, and he was giving sketches away
Oh my
for
God.
free.
Wow,
For free.
Wow.
that might have been a different show then,
Yeah.
because I remember I was.
That was mine was a little bit later in the '90s.
Yeah,
Preacher
because this was
out.
early in
Yeah.
the '90s when there was like this whole East Coast battle with the shows.
I remember that,
And
yeah.
finally, they started booking the shows at the same time and forcing like the top publishers to choose. And I remember Marvel and DC said, "You know what? Screw this. We're not going to any of them."
Yeah.
And that was so there was a big New York comic convention
Wow.
and no DC or Marvel presence. So I remember walking through the aisle. That's why I didn't have because I never expected to meet these people.
Yeah.
And I'm going walking down the aisle, and there's Frank Miller sitting at the Dark Horse booth, and nobody's talking to him. He's just talking to like Jim Shooter and somebody else. And I was like, I literally stopped in my tracks and like guffawed. I was just like, what? And I went over and said hi to him, and just, acknowledged him at least. I didn't have a discussion with him because I was just so caught off guard. I didn't expect it
Yeah, the
to
show
happen.
I was definitely.
I mean, if I would have known, I would obviously had something along with me, but I was just completely blown away and caught off guard. But
Wow,
I thought
that's
maybe it was the
incredible.
same show. I was like, well,
Well, even that's close enough shows. I love when Jamie and I used to compare notes about Star Trek conventions, and we start talking about people we saw, and we were at the same shows, but I didn't know him back then. I often wonder if I could go back in my mind and find him walking around or sitting in the audience. That would have been a cool thing to do. So yeah, I love those kind of stories.
D.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah, because I remember like he walked away from the Dark Horse booth and was walking up the steps, and nobody had
A
like
clue.
recognized him and
Wow.
approached him. Like no, he was just like,
incredible.
and I was just like, what? And I was just like, do I say something? Do I not?
Well-
You know what I mean? It's like one of those things. It's like I want to, but then I'm like, well, I don't want to draw attention to him because maybe he's
Yeah.
appreciating that he can just walk around. You
and
know?
back then, it was a lot easier to have anonymity.
Absolutely.
Going
Yeah.
in a show.
But for me, I mean, as such a fan of his work and stuff, I was just like starstruck. I was just
Yeah.
like, I didn't know what to say, but
Wow,
it was
that's
an
impressive.
experience I'll never forget.
should put
And then
my-
I finally did actually speak and talk with him and got a picture with him when I went to San Diego in '99.
Oh, terrific.
I went to his Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot
That's right.
panel and
That was
met
with
him
Jeff
afterwards.
Darrow, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway,
I should point out by that Kevin has a Daredevil T-shirt on with the
bet.
chest sigil.
You
Well
bet.
done, sir. Well done.
Dressed for the occasion.
Indeed. I thought we'd kind of start with.
So how did you get Mazzucchelli's signature?
Oh, that's right. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
come on.
That one was more simple. One of the early, official New York Comic Cons that go on now.
Okay.
It might have been the first or the second one. Probably not the first one because you could barely get into that one because of the fire marshal controversy at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, that first one, I did meet Gene Colan and get a Howard the Duck sketch from him that he mailed to me,
Oh, wow.
which I still proudly have in my office. But so maybe it was the second or third. Mazzucchelli was there, and I was like, oh, God, I want to sketch so badly. Now, he was one of those artists, and this is very smart. He had sketches already done.
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen many artists doing that at that point yet. And he had Daredevil sketches, and, of course, for Batman Year One, Batman sketches.
I remember seeing that.
They were all at least $500 a piece,
Wow,
which
we.
good for him.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
But I was like, I can't afford these. And then they were in that style, like I would have, but I just couldn't swing it. But I got him to sign the book. Of
Yeah,
course.
that's awesome.
So,
Wow.
Next best thing.
yeah, in some ways it's the best thing.
Sure.
But let's, Mert, I want to ask you a question about this right off the bat. What do you think? What do you think of how Miller applies religious imagery in this story? Because it's teeming with it.
Yeah,
So,
I've got
I
my
bet you do.
my standard single
He's
side.
got the yellow legal
oh my
pad,
God.
ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Look
Yeah.
at that! Look at that writing.
I mean,
Very-
that I saw that when I came in here, and I was like, I'm blown away. I'm like, that's what I love about Murd. I mean, it's just like everything's so well
Everything.
thought and so, so constructed, and I'm just looking at his page, and I'm like, Jesus, mighty man.
Now you're setting
I'm
yourself
under-
up for disappointment.
I'm
Kevin.
underprepared.
And I need a magnifying glass. I couldn't read writing.
Yeah, it's a little small. But in largest letters at the very top of the page, Christ Allegory a Go-Go.
Murd, have at it.
Because it's all over. I mean, well, we can start with the title if you want. Now, interesting bit of synchronicity here. On the drive in from South Jersey to be present for this august gathering, I passed one of those roadside scripture quote signs that one can find outside of certain fundamental households.
Yeah.
It read, "Ye must be born again." This I see on my way here to talk about this story. Yeah, it's a quote from the third chapter of the Gospel of John, in which Jesus is conversing with Nicodemus and says to him, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except he be born again, a man cannot see the kingdom of God." And that's what Daredevil has to go through here. And I'm sure that the choice of the wording "born again" as opposed to the more standard "reborn" is no accident either. Because, as you say, Chris, it is teeming with other references to the story of Christ.
And even some of the artistic depictions of the way of his body. I think the Pieta is in there.
Oh,
at
yeah,
one
I
point.
was going to mention that. Yeah, like the splash page. The title pages, there's kind of a progression.
Yes.
Yeah, if you look at the
good
title
point.
page of issue number 227, you get Matt kind of curled up here in his own bed.
Right.
And then it's like the title page of each of the first three issues is like a different trimester as Matt approaches his rebirth. In the second issue, he's curled up in the fetal position in this seedy hotel room, and then the splash page of the next issue, he's curled up in garbage on the street after clawing his way out of that car that
Yes.
the Kingpin had sealed, that taxi that he was sealed in and tossed
yeah.
into the harbor. So that's kind of like rolling the stone in front of his tomb.
Oh, fantastic.
And then 3 issues in, like on the third day, and then we get to this. This is what you were talking about. I
Yes.
think,
Yeah,
Chris.
that's
the splash page of number 230, I think.
Yeah.
There he is. It's kind of part nativity, part Pieta, as you
Yep.
said, which is Mother Mary holding the dead body of Christ, and there's Matt with his actual mother, the nun, Sister Maggie. They're holding
Which
his
is another
hand.
one of the big revelations of this story.
Yeah, which when you read the story, I mean, technically it's never confirmed. I loved how he made it so ambiguous. I mean, obviously, again, being a reader, you always heard about Matt's mother.
You assumed she was dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this pops up, and then and it's only in the one issue. Yeah, there's the homage to Pieta.
Oh, yes, that's even more
Yeah.
Pieta-ish than
Yeah.
the thing I was...
But I mean, he asks her, when he's conscious again after she's nursed him back to health, and she denies it, but then he says his own dialogue. It hardly, doesn't lie,
Yeah.
So, but I loved how he kept it ambiguous, though. Like it wasn't, like he didn't focus on it and dwell on it any further.
And nor does she ever say in the story. Now, it comes out in subsequent issues. Nor does she say in the
Right.
story that I'm your mother.
Yeah,
Right.
She
Yeah.
flatly denies it, but
Yeah.
Matt can hear through her heartbeat that she's
Right.
lying.
Yeah.
Nice touch.
I also found when he's deeply ill after he's been stabbed by Turk in the Santa suit,
Yep.
and they find him and he's in the alley, and he was in the river and all this, and the fever's burning up, and the other nuns are like, he's not going to make it, and she's praying, and I'm not a religious person, although I've studied various religions and I've read the Bible and things like that, but the prayer she's speaking to God as like you have to save him. He's going to be like a lightning in your hands. Like it still gives me chills, that prayer, because Miller's going right to the core of why Daredevil, the hero, is so important to that city, and how his mother, who also I'm sure feels tremendous guilt at abandoning her child. Right. She is acknowledging through her faith, recognizing how important her son is, not just to her own redemption, but to that whole community. I think it's one of the most powerful moments in the entire story, when she's imploring God to save her son, not just for her own sake, but for everybody, essentially. And it's a moment in the story that still gives me chills. And the way it's drawn, let me find the page number.
I mean, you think about it, in my eyes, you've heard about the
triangle,
yeah.
crucifix. It's beautifully rendered.
With his mother, again, it was referenced in stories prior, but nothing ever detailed. And you think about, he was literally abandoned by his mother, at a very young age and raised by his father, which we found out in his origin. But then to make the revelation of his mother still being alive, but what a way to introduce her by then making her a nun. So then at least you have some sort. It just takes a whole nother layer to it, because now it adds so much more meaning, to the fact that because otherwise you just look at it as an abandoned child.
Yeah.
Now you look at it as, she made a hell of a choice, for herself and whatever reasons and whatnot. But it was just something that just was so well handled.
And I love the touch when they go the flashback, and because they never really explored this before up to this point, how when he was a kid, when he doesn't know how to control his senses yet, and how overwhelming and agonizing that was. He talks about like people smelling people's sweat and feeling the starch sheets, and how loud his father is. And his mother comes and she says, "Wait a minute, this is a gift, actually, and it's yours." And like she was the first to realize what he could do with what had happened to him. And then Stick, of course, comes later and all that. But the role of his mother I think is so important to this story, and giving, and I mean helping him, as Murd said, become born again, because now he's a man who knows who his mother is and how important she is, and how she helps him recover himself and born again.
Which, when I was reading it, that was a significance to me for the title again, because she is giving birth to him again in a different way.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, that was really, again, very moving and significant as far as I was concerned.
Actually, it's one reason Matt has to thank the Kingpin for precipitating
Sure.
that.
What was your reaction to Maggie and how they used her, Murd, in the story?
No, I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And actually, surprisingly, I don't have any notes about her. But your point is well taken. She is pretty crucial to Matt's development, his reconstruction.
The other thing, just looking back as we go back to the first issue, and as you mentioned early in the show, within, I don't know, 4 pages, his whole life is destroyed.
Oh my goodness!
Everything is gone.
Yeah. It's just every page. It's like you don't think it could get any worse, and it's just like boom, boom,
And then at
boom.
the end, they blow up his brownstone.
Yeah.
And that's what he knows is the Kingpin, because he's such a gangster type.
Well, he even
move.
says it at the end.
Yeah.
You
shouldn't have
signed it. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, when Shane said earlier he was expecting more spandex action, I was actually expecting more suffering on Matt's part. I thought this would be more prolonged, like he would be twisting in the wind a little longer before he realized, oh, hey, the Kingpin. It was a nice piece of work, Kingpin. You shouldn't have signed it by leaving his costume in the rubble. But yeah, I was very happy that he came to that realization by the end of the first issue, so we didn't have to share in his agony and uncertainty.
And it's the first time we see the Kingpin in a new, far more terrifying. It's just like, because you realize he just picked up the phone, and with a couple phone calls, he totally dismantles this man's
Absolutely.
life.
This guy's a little more than just a crime lord.
Yeah, and when you think about, and when later on when he's trying to seduce Nuke, and he says something like, I am the corporation I am like something in the corporation that is America.
He's standing there caressing a flag and wearing a string tie.
Yes, exactly.
The whole Colonel Jingo routine.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But you realize, like there's just in the news today how that hedge fund manager Jeffrey Epstein was, and all the terrible things he was involved in, and how his immense wealth and power and political connections essentially protected him for so long.
Right.
And how the Kingpin has access to those same type of connections, and he destroys well, he said, I want to destroy a good man's life.
Right. And it gives you that whole perspective of, it's almost, well, not almost, it is the fact that, he wants to destroy Matt Murdock because Matt Murdock is, the penultimate good guy, and this is his only way of, and that's what I think was so moving about this, as well as, especially for the Kingpin as a villain, is the fact that he literally defeated Daredevil without ever having a fight with him. That was one of the first things that really kind of compelled me in this story. Is like, wow, he just completely, ripped Daredevil asunder in one issue without ever having one fight with him.
You're right, because traditionally you want that climactic Donnybrook.
Right.
And the fight they have, Matt is like at his lowest ebb.
Right.
And the Kingpin says, I had to restrain myself from tearing him limb from limb. Like, Matt really didn't have much of a chance.
No.
And that's their only actual physical confrontation. And that's when Matt is tossed in the river at the end of it.
I mean, and I think the beauty that after this had transpired and other writers had come onto the title and stuff, I mean, literally to me, this story does not culminate until the run that D.G. Chichester did with Lee Weeks called The Fall of the Kingpin, which ended in issue 300.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that was how many years of Daredevil stories that, till finally Daredevil got his real kind of revenge on the Kingpin and ripped him asunder, But, so I like when things like that transpire between arcs and different writers, and they build upon what has come before and instead of stepping on, and that was something I really enjoyed as well. So it's...
You got to go, brother?
Yeah, I got to depart. I was packing up stuff, but I didn't want to leave in the middle of the discussion. I'll listen to the rest later.
Cool. Thanks for joining us, man.
Oh, thanks for coming. God, it was fun to listen while I could.
Good to see you, brother. Damn good.
You too.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Murd, how did you feel about, because you've read plenty of Kingpin stories, how did you feel about the portrayal of the Kingpin in this book? How did it strike you?
Kind of next level.
Yeah.
You had to keep reminding yourself that you were reading about a superpowered entity here.
Yeah.
Because...
We're all shaking Shane's hand.
Criminal connections and illicit power are kind of presented as a superhuman ability here for the Kingpin. And
Right.
he's larger than life, both figuratively and literally, because his physical dimensions are so Brobdingnagian. Or, gargantuan is probably better.
Wow.
But he is closer to the literary gargantua in that he's just large and he's insatiable, and he's just he's in a process of transcendence here. Like his little vendetta against Daredevil, I think he envisions as like a part of his apotheosis to a new breed of criminal. Like he dreams of being a legitimate businessman and just
As
first
you
he
said,
says,
taking the underworld with him.
right. First he
into the
thinks he's going to leave it
legitimate
behind him, and then
world.
he thinks, no, I'm going to take it with me
Exactly.
into the next realm, the next sphere. But then Daredevil thwarts him there and throws him a couple steps back down the evolutionary ladder. And at the end, we find Kingpin depowered and humiliated somewhat. I mean, his comeuppance is actually, objectively speaking, somewhat slight. He's lost a little bit of underworld influence and respect.
And also some of his public veneer has been stripped away.
Yes,
as well.
he's now decried by the businessmen that were this close to accepting him into their ranks.
Yep.
And now the entire city, his city,
Yes.
views him exactly the way Murdock himself does, i.e. as a villain. And subjectively, from the Kingpin's point of view, this is the unkindest cut of all. He can endure that less than he could have if he'd simply lost his fortune or been thrown in jail.
That's an excellent point. And in fact, looking at the Macchio introduction in my 1987 trade edition, this is a description of the Kingpin. At the center of the dark web of deceit and corruption squats the spider, bloated on the blood of his victims. His movements may be slow and nearly hypnotic as he spins additional strands, or blindingly fast when a victim is entrapped. And this spider revels in the agony of its prey, in their frantic and futile attempts at escape as he ultimately descends on them to drain their life away.
I mean, and Macchio also states is the fact that this is a guy that has no powers, no superpowers, nothing, that we considered a comic book villain. But look what he does.
Yeah.
I mean, he is maniacal.
By the end of this story, he is as much a man on the edge as Matt Murdock was at the beginning of the story.
But this takes place for him as a character. If you go back to Miller's run on Daredevil,
They'd clashed many times.
yeah, but I mean, he was behind the whole. What was it, Chira, or his name was that was running for mayor?
Yes, oh, absolutely.
So that was his way of trying to manipulate
Yep.
power.
Yep.
By having him run for mayor and being able to control this guy, and him, being able to, obtain power that way. And of course, Daredevil thwarted that at the last minute. And now you're seeing that, this is a more direct approach.
Yes.
For Kingpin. So you can see these extensions of, what he established prior, with what Miller had done.
And what's incredible about this story, as I look at these opening issues, is that Miller and Mazzucchelli established that every character has to face a decisive choice. Like Nick Manolis, the cop.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you feel for the guy. His child's going to die.
Right.
Like, he needs this surgery, right? And he has a spotless record, but he turns because I got to save my son, so he sells out Matt. And it's not like, okay, this guy's a pure villain. He was someone in an impossible situation. Like, what would you do in that case?
Which shows you, I mean, I think it adds power to what the Kingpin did, because it shows you how he manipulated
Yeah.
whoever he could to make all these things happen.
And Karen Page, who we know from the reading history is a good person, but her life has just collapsed in on itself because of a series of bad choices that she made.
Right.
And she's a junkie. I mean,
Porn star junkie.
Yeah, and she feels like she's got nowhere else to go. All that matters now is the fix, and she sells Matt out. She reveals his identity. And this is a time period where, today it's almost a joke. Like, it seems like everybody knows everybody's identities in these comics.
Yeah.
Not then.
No.
So
That was significant.
yeah, that absolutely was significant.
And then for it to be her yet besides.
Yeah, and also I love the portrayal of Foggy in this story.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times, sometimes Foggy's there for kind of comic relief, like he's falling over himself and like, he's eating the big sandwich or whatever else. But they really established Foggy as one of the moral centers of this whole story.
Yep, and a really talented attorney in his own
very talented
right.
attorney, which even the Kingpin acknowledges.
Right,
and
makes a note to have him hired.
Yes.
Those two little black and white panels.
Beautifully done.
I guess they're supposed to represent like court illustrator's sketches.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's great couple of panel sequence there.
Good point, Murd. And and Foggy, he's worried about Matt, and then Gloriana, who had only been introduced recently as a character in Daredevil, and
Right, it's Denny O'Neill's run.
yes,
Yes.
and she and Matt were involved. I love when she sends him the cassette tape. There was just such. It's the '80s, so like it's a cassette tape, right?
Yeah.
But there's such a realism to that. Like a relationship's gone bad. You don't want to face the person again, so you send him this cassette tape across town, and just the writing when she's talking to him in that tape. I mean, it's Miller at the top of his form as a scripter because it's so authentic with what she's saying, how she's saying it. Almost imploring Matt, like, look, if you just open up to me, maybe, it's so well done. Like, either you're in your own life or people who've been in a situation like that, and it's so perfectly captured. But how do you feel about Foggy and Gloriana getting involved?
I mean, that was an interesting twist, and
you
again,
can tell, you can tell it's brief though. By the end, they're already kind of coming apart.
but it's just another element to the whole, like you said, the psyche of Matt.
Yep, just piling more suffering on Matt for the reader's benefit there.
I mean, that had nothing to do with the Kingpin, but obviously was very significant.
Yeah, and two people who are very close to Matt, and they're kind of like
because it's that extending a
ports
feeling
in a
to be,
storm. They're kind of come together because they're both,
your family. We're Matt's family.
Exactly.
Right.
So,
But it also for him, especially when he becomes aware of it, it's like the ultimate betrayal as well.
Yeah.
So
Especially
again, he
with
feels
his
more
mindset.
isolated and alone. So, but what an interesting way to develop both of those characters and extend those characters.
look at that cover.
I know.
Well, I'm looking at the cover of the second issue, Purgatory.
228, yeah.
But just
The emotion.
I mean, the emotion and a man completely on his like a last tender hook, basically. I mean, it's. And we're so accustomed to Matt Murdock wearing those glasses,
Yeah.
right? But now you're seeing through the glasses to just the sheer panic, anxiety, and terror in those eyes, which we're not accustomed
Despair.
to seeing. Despair, which we're not accustomed to seeing in Daredevil, in that character. And as Murd mentioned, talk about capturing the seediness of a motel room.
Yes.
At $10, and I made change.
Yeah.
Yep. So the thing
To
is
get the
like 10 feet by
It's a
5
flop
feet.
house. Yeah, I mean, and when he's calling Foggy, like, I'm on to you, Nelson. Like, the guy, he's lost it completely. Like, he's his reality is totally shifted, where everyone's his enemy. He can't trust. Like, he could have gone to Foggy and stayed at his apartment.
Sure.
Of course, or probably other people, or Ben, or whoever. But, but
It shows you the state of his psyche and
Exactly.
and where he was mentally at the point.
and for me, the most compelling parts of the story when it comes to script writing are the Kingpin's thoughts. I think this is some of Miller's strongest scripting in the book, where he talks about the joy of torturing Matt Murdock as you would as a child would a fly.
I think where the strength of that, like his writing, comes into the stories. If you, like you had stated earlier, is when you read the panels. It's not so much the dialogue; it's
Yeah.
the panels.
Exactly. Miller is much more focused on like monologuing than he is.
Exactly.
And Murd, having read comics for so many years, how do you feel about, because this is a style you don't really see much anymore, so how do you feel about the use of captions as the main thrust of the narrative?
Well, it really shows the the pulp prose fiction
Yeah.
influence here. As we were just saying, Miller is relying more on internal monologues and narrative captions than he is on dialogue balloons, and that was not so often done in those days. And so he's really getting kind of purple at some points with his use of those captions. Yeah, it's enjoyable, and I take your point about Joe Rosen's lettering earlier. How it's important to distinguish all these different internal speech patterns.
Yes.
Since he's relying so heavily on these sort of prose captions, and I agree that the newsprint style of Phil Urich,
Ben Urich.
Ben
Ben
Urich, yeah, I was getting him confused.
Phil's the Green Goblin.
Right. Boy, oh boy. Yeah. So his clipped, no BS journalistic phrasing, and then those newsprint styled words. That's very, very distinctive, and it would have been helpful if they'd actually done a little more of that. If each character had his or her own font, or at least like a distinctive and consistently applied color to their internal captions. It became a little confusing in some spots to see who was saying what. And I noticed that Miller sometimes, in one caption, he would be revealing a character's thoughts in the third person, and then would suddenly randomly shift to first person, like in the middle of a single series of captions, a single monologue.
Well, you're right, because like the Kingpin's, I'm looking at the book now, his font is the same as Karen's, for example.
Yeah.
I have to read, first two things.
But I mean, with Karen's, is the thing that where they made it distinct was
color.
with the color.
Right? Yeah, the color of the caption, that's true.
Because Kingpin's like that fuchsia red.
Yes, that's a good point.
And then, Karen's are the orange, yellowish ones, so that's how they were, try to distinguish.
A couple artistic points I want to make for the second issue. First of all, the layout of the fight between Matt and the Kingpin in the gym is just masterful.
I mean, I love that panel. Just that look on the Kingpin's face. I mean, he is not swayed or...
He's looking forward to it.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, he's like the smirk. He's just like, oh, here, finally.
Welcome to my parlor.
Exactly. Talk about the spider. Yeah, exactly.
And we have to remember that, and this is established going back to Lee and Romita, that the Kingpin is an awesomely muscled man. He does not have any superpowers, but he's so conditioned and trained himself that he can essentially stand toe-to-toe with people who are in some cases superpowered and to actually fight them.
Very little of that frame of his is fat. It's almost all muscle.
And here you see the real brutality of their battle and the blood gushing out when he breaks the Kingpin's nose with a billy club.
Right.
But then when again the writing, it would be the Kingpin's thoughts. It would be a joy to end it there. Something about the man brings to the Kingpin a bloodlust he has not felt since his youth. It takes an effort of will to restrain himself from tearing Murdock limb from limb. But the Kingpin is a careful man. There are details to consider. And then, of course, the taxi cab. And look at Shields' coloring.
I know that whole murkiness
it's beautiful color.
Well, and it's reminiscent of what he's experiencing. The murkiness, the darkness. That's like the culmination. Again, you get that culmination. This is where, that's that moment of despair. That's the breaking moment. It's like he could have died there, and that would have been the end of the story.
And then, of course, just again the art of narrative repetition. There is no corpse. Mm-hmm. There is no corpse.
Yep.
There is no corpse.
Miller does that well.
Yep.
He doesn't take it to ridiculous extremes the way Bendis sometimes does.
Yeah, but I mean, you think about it. I mean, the restraint of him ripping him limb from limb. Yeah. He did not stop. He still wanted to kill Matt Murdock.
Oh, absolutely.
But he just did it in a different way. Another way. So it wasn't like the James Bond thing. You got to get out of this trap. Kind of that crap. That we were kind of used to.
Yep,
I shouldn't say crap, but I mean, you know what I mean. It was just again, it was different. It was like, I'm still going to kill this guy. It's just that I'm not going to do it in my own bare hands.
Right. Not going to do it in a way that A, is going to incriminate myself.
Exactly.
B, I want to do it in a way that will eradicate Murdock in the minds of society, in a way that, he's a drunk, desperate loser, and he just stole a cab and brought about his own end.
Which is perfect for
Let's forget about it.
For as Miller calls him, he is the Lord of Crime. But he wants to bring the criminal world into the legitimate world. So this is a perfectly, quote, legitimate way to dispose of his arch nemesis.
Yep. So. Little denying that he's kind of the Satan figure here. Even more so than Daredevil himself. And just look at Mazzucchelli's...
Devouring souls,
basically. Yeah, exactly.
Cover.
Yep. Kind of Dante's Inferno has Satan like chomping on the three biggest sinners. Well, what Dante considered the three biggest sinners, right there in his mouth. And that's what Kingpin's doing on that stained glass window.
That's why I wouldn't buy any of the... I did buy the hardcover of this. Because I only buy hardcovers of things that I think are very significant, and of course this was one of them. But when they came out with
cover, though, right?
No, and that's my point is that when they republished a trade again, in the newer versions they recolored it, and whoever recolored it, and I'm not trying to put anybody down, but I didn't like it because they like he colored the stained glass
Yeah.
in it and did it more simply. So you lost that whole significance of what Mazzucchelli did with the
And
stained glass
that's I think
on
on the
It's
cover
not as
Murd has
vivid,
there.
yeah.
Well, that's not. I mean, this is not a recolored version. It's just that they eliminated the side
Exactly.
panels,
Yeah, I'm
which are
getting
so
only
important.
1/3 of
Which
the
are very
triptych, so
important, but
it's like
when
a
you-
pan and scan version of the original cover.
right? When you look at the other trade, though, they recolored it, and including recoloring the stained glass, they did not go into the detail of coloring, and it looks all like it blends. You know what I mean? So it really loses a lot of emphasis.
Yep. And this is coming from a man who has done pro color work, folks.
That's a good point.
Heed
And
his
I-
words.
Yeah.
I had this as a poster too for years.
Yeah, I do too. I
until
still
it
have it.
fell
Actually.
apart.
Yeah, I still
But-
have it. But that's why I love this cover because
Yeah.
you know you lose that significance with these panels, and like you had stated earlier, Chris, that you know each one of these panels really captures these characters in these periods of stained glass. You know, and you even see Melvin Potter and Turk.
Yep.
You know, and that image of Kingpin is just so significantly well done. And then you, of course, you see Maggie with the halo and. It's just so much about it. It's such a
the whole
beautiful,
story is
complex
there.
piece. Yeah,
Yeah.
he literally captures the essence of the whole story in one cover. I mean, it's just brilliant. So to me, when they republished it, I was like, what a significant loss, you know.
Murray, anything else you want to say about the first two issues that we didn't cover?
Can we look at that first page?
Yeah.
Because I've seen this page reproduced multiple times.
The cover of 227.
Oh no, I mean the
He's
first
talking
the first page
Yeah.
where the fall of Karen Page.
Yeah,
When she makes that fateful decision that plunges Daredevil's world and her own into utter chaos, from which both of them, hand in hand, will emerge ultimately, which is a good thing. But here at the first, it's really kind of haunting, looking at it's very noirish here, just the use of light, the chiaroscuro
light
here,
through
the shadows cast by the Venetian blinds,
Yep.
Yeah.
and Karen looking every inch the desperate, strung out junkie. I mean, this right here on the first page here. This is something that would get to be practically a specialty of Miller's. It's just the quick, dirty deconstruction, evisceration almost of a Silver Age convention of comics. In this case, the starry-eyed ingenue as superhero love interest.
She's like a cadaverous scarecrow, essentially.
Really, yes. Yeah, she's downright gaunt. This is not the pretty blonde of decades past. She's been reduced here to a cornered, starving game animal, pretty much.
Yeah.
Just that one big staring eye that you can see in the bottommost panel as she extends the envelope toward her prospective buyer and says, I said the name. And he's got another name, and it's written down right here. You want it or not. So there she is, having her little Judas moment, selling out, betraying Daredevil for her 30 pieces of opioid silver.
yeah.
And so that's her big fall from grace, and everything kind of precipitates from there. But yeah, that's a very famous page, because long before I ever read this story, which is, again, I just did for the first time like 2 years ago, I had seen this page reproduced in a lot of magazine articles and websites. It's one of the most famous images of the whole story.
Yeah, that's a good
You
point.
bet.
I wanted to point out in the third chapter, Pariah, how Miller, and this is kind of a precursor almost, I think, to Man Without Fear. He revisits Daredevil's origin, not changing anything. There's still the radioactive isotope and all that, but he makes you realize the cost physically to Matt as a kid when he's struck with that and what it does to his senses and how maddening it is. And these are very powerful pages. It's all black panels primarily, and just Matt's thoughts. Everything hurts. Sandpaper scrapes my skin every time I move. No, not sandpaper. Sheets, starch sheets, and the smells, chemical smells, disinfectants. The door swings open on screaming hinges. People come and go, smelling like bathtubs full of sweat, smelling like eaten food, like Italian sauces and half-digested eggs. That one caption box.
Yeah.
I mean, it almost turns your stomach because you think about, like all those odors, like times 100, just overwhelming your senses. And it's tremendous writing. It really is.
It's never been presented that way
No,
before.
not
I
at
mean,
all.
because every time his amplified senses are presented to us, it's always in a positive way. Oh, I can hear the heartbeats. Oh, I can do that. But there it's like, you get a real sense of, the drawback of having that ability, and he has no, it's not something he controls. That's what it is.
He's
You
been
know.
cast into a dark and terrifying new world, surrounded with alien stimuli.
Yeah.
God, Bert, I'm glad you're here.
I
It is
know.
pretty terrifying. And
And Murd, you made a great point. The title page of Pariah, the way Matt is curled up in the corner,
In the tighter fetal position. Yeah.
like in that tight
In a
fetal
ball.
position, just sort of being swallowed by his own despair and just lack of place. It's a tremendous page. The way the winos are splayed about him, and I also noticed again, props to Mazzucchelli and Scheel in that sequence where Gloriana is mugged, and you'll notice how all the people around them are sort of like these mute tones because no one's helping or
Right.
paying attention. And she's talking about how terrible the city is. And you see Miller do that in Dark Knight later, too. Like that guy with, with the placard as Bruce Wayne's walking in the street, his hands thrust in his pockets like, ye despair, or something like that. I remember the exact image on the sign. But the feeling that, these people are alone, that the wider society is not going to help you, is apathetic or is too afraid. And that only makes pronounced how much their little moments of heroism matter because there's no support system for them at all. It's very bleak in many ways.
And very real.
Yes, completely
Yeah,
real.
exactly.
It's absolutely
Yeah.
in my view of history. So that always struck me. And again, how good Foggy is. Foggy's like the really decent person in this whole. Well, how do you see Foggy in this?
He's like the moral compass, the moral center of it, and obviously it strengthens their relationship. Him and Matt's relationship. It really shows the dynamic and the strength of their friendship.
Yep, he's the taproot of Matt's old life.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Allows him to regrow from there.
Like a tether to what's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
If the Kingpin had made a move against Foggy, as the same way he did against
Yeah.
Matt, I think Matt's chances of clawing his way back would have been like 50% less.
I agree.
For that matter, he might have been thrown into jail, which, after all, was Kingpin's original plan.
But
Right.
Foggy was such a talented lawyer, he kept him out of jail.
Right? All he lost was his law license.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the other thing that in this issue, when Ben Urich goes to Bellevue, where Manolis' son is going to be, and he of course dies under the knife later. I think this is my first real exposure to Ben Urich. I knew him from some of the earlier Miller work, but the way Miller really digs into his character in this story, for me, was unprecedented when it came to appreciating Ben Urich as a character, and how he's one of the key narrative thrusts of the whole story. Because this is what I want to ask you: Foggy doesn't know Matt's Daredevil yet, right?
No.
He doesn't.
No. Only Ben does.
Only Ben does.
Right.
Right. Because there's a moment when they meet in the park and Ben's thinking, I know who he is. Do you know Nelson? Because I don't think Foggy finds out till much later on, right?
Yeah, it's much later. To be honest
Yeah.
with you, I can't think offhand exactly
Yeah.
when it was. But yeah, he has no idea that Matt's
Yeah.
Daredevil at this point.
So, and that's what makes Ben as a character so compelling, because he's in on this secret very few people actually know. And I find Ben to be another one of those characters who he's a good person. Like he's trying to help Matt because he recognizes how important Matt is to that city and to that community. And in the end, he's risking his life and his wife's life, essentially.
Exactly, yeah.
To try to help him. And again,
I like that. I like the scenes that he brought Jameson into it, and with Ben trying to do the story. I mean,
and Robbie Robertson. too.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
Yeah,
as
the scene in...
yeah.
Talk about film noir.
That-
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
When they're in Jameson's office and the Venetian blinds.
It's
the light,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
It's also one of the best J. Jonah Jameson scenes.
Exactly.
It captures the essence of what Jameson really is. Putting aside the Spider-Man menace stuff.
Yeah.
He's that, but he's also
He's
a hard-bitten newsman who
he's the
believes in
Crusaders,
the
like,
power of the press.
Right.
It can topple presidents. It needs to be aimed at the kingpin, and you're the man to do it.
And
essentially,
Urich, at that point, he's kind of at his own low ebb.
yes.
Yeah.
Here he is on the front cover, just kind of sitting there looking very small and powerless, unable to write even a simple puff piece. And not just because his hand is in a cast.
And by the way, Murd, the scene where they're asking him to write the puff piece, and he's on the. That's the next issue. That's the issue entitled "Born Again," and he's on the phone, and the nurse assassin
Oh, yeah.
what
Doris
is-
the nurse, yeah.
is
Or
strangling
Lois, sorry,
is
Lois the nurse.
strangling Manolis on the phone, and think about moments. I would like to think none of us have been in a situation like that. We've all been in situations where life's kind of going on around you, but we're stressing out about something that no one else really knows about, and it's you kind of feel overwhelmed, and you kind of feel that stress sucking you into kind of the normal mayhem around you of daily life, and it's so well captured in those pages. And you know, Ben talks about how at the end he hears the rattle as Manola's gasps his final breath.
But I love how it plays out because you know when Ben's listening to the whole thing,
Look at
it's
the coloring again.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That almost reminded me of Sienkiewicz when I was
Yeah,
reading this.
that's
I
a
was
good
like,
point.
wow, I was like, look how abstract that, you know.
His eyes
yeah.
wide with terror, his face, you know, they become a
Almost
crimson
cartoonish.
hue.
You
Yes,
know?
his
Yep.
coloring he turns like bright red.
Yep.
But it's like the whole time, you know, Robbie Robertson and the editorial of the Bugle are talking behind Ben while he's listening to this
man being
conversation on the
murdered,
phone.
yeah.
He's being murdered while,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, and you just see, you know, again, this is a time where, you know, in this story, you see Nick, you know, reaching out because again, his son had died, so there's no longer the leverage.
truth,
So
yeah.
so they're like, oh, here's the turning point. You know, he's gonna, this is gonna turn the story around, and immediately he gets snuffed out. You know, literally suffocates and snuffs that option out, and you know the whole character of Uric, you know, to be able to, I shouldn't to be able to, but to have to listen to that. And you know, to think
Well, you
about
got
it,
guys complaining about the rent in the background, like
Yeah.
everyday humdrum stuff. And I mean, think about it. We're sitting here enjoying this conversation, and in other parts of the world, people are you know being killed, right? I mean,
executed or whatever. Yeah,
it's just, and it brings all that home right in this sequence.
But it literally just rips it out. You know, you think, oh, here's a turning point. Here, you know, here's multiple things that can turn the story around, and they're extinguished like immediately.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh wow, okay.
And we have to remember that Miller had used Miller didn't create Ben Urich. He had been created before that, but I think Mackenzie created him, actually.
Mackenzie
Yeah.
it significantly made the character
Yeah, he
what
did.
he was.
Very important.
Because that was the issues where 163 is where he found out Matt's identity, and then 164 was that whole story where he wrote the story,
But then he doesn't.
and then he decides
doesn't
to
publish it.
Yeah,
Yep.
he burns it up. And
But then Miller uses Ben, Elektra stabs Ben Urich. Like he's a major supporting character, and that's why
Absolutely.
his role here is so important because he knows who Matt is, and he and Matt had this friendship, and now he can't find Matt when Matt was first starting to come apart. He like just says to Ben on the phone, "I have no comment for the press," and he says he chuckles like dry ice cracking. Miller's again Murd's right on the money.
Yeah.
The noirish feel of the scripting is so perfect for this story. And looking at again as is Lois the name of the nurse?
Lois
Killer?
is the nurse. Yeah.
As she's killing Manolis, again the use of color, the crimson hues. I mean, the cigarette light and the reflecting on Ben's face. It's so well done.
I mean, again, you know, you talk about the characters we know,
Yeah.
but as her as a character, that nurse,
Perfectly delineated.
I know. It's like I read this story again, and it's just like I hate that character. It's like, you know, I can't wait till she gets her comeuppance, and I'm like, this is just some ancillary character that he uses for the story, but it's so significant, and it just shows the
and a
significance
character
of every
is so
character.
concerned about her professionalism that she has to finish the job and try to kill Ben.
Exactly.
Basically.
I mean, because she beats up, you know, and tries to kill him at the apartment, and then, you know, so it's like, again, it just shows the strength of how he can take just this character that's somewhat would be insignificant, and how significant he makes her in this book, like literally to the point where I'm, you know, I can't wait till she gets her comeuppance. I'm like, you know, that's the
does she
strength
ever.
of a writer, you know.
I thought the 2-page sequence where Karen meets Foggy was extremely compelling.
Yeah.
The look of horror on Foggy's face when Karen just says, "I'm a junkie and I got to find Matt or I'll be murdered," matter of factly.
Yeah.
And look at that art, the look on his face. But he wants to help her. Like even though she's clearly dangerous to be around. We haven't mentioned that homicidal maniac she's traveling around with, Paulo, whatever his name was, to get back to New York City. And we should always note that Miller brought a level of violence to Daredevil going back to the Elektra period that was pretty striking for comics. I mean, I've always talked about Daredevil 181 and that climactic battle between Bullseye and Elektra, which is extremely brutal.
Right.
And that continues here. I mean, just the raw ugliness of the street violence that you see throughout the book. And as Murd mentioned, we get Melvin Potter again.
Yeah.
Yep,
I thought
formerly
very sympathetic character the way he's captured here.
Yeah.
because he had reformed, right, Murd?
Yes,
yeah.
he had.
Yeah.
Yeah, even by issue 226.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all about him being blackmailed by some small-time crooks.
Betsy, I think the probation officer,
Right,
or
like
who
the
would
social
become his
worker
girlfriend.
slash
Yeah.
therapist who was helping him back into like normal
Yeah,
society.
she's the one that grounded him, and
Because he was identified as being like mentally or emotionally underdeveloped.
Yes.
Like he had some kind of mental problem, and then she was helping
Which they
him.
really emphasize in the Daredevil television show when they show that character.
Yes, that perfectly cast by the
yeah,
way.
exactly.
But I noticed on the last few panels of this issue, Born Again, the way they draw Matt's face, he's composed, he's calm, the beard, almost like a. Is beatific the right word, Murd? Like,
Yes.
Like an expression on him where
Yes.
there's just such a
A
calm,
blessed calm over him.
Yeah.
And I remember reading this. When you read this page, I suddenly feel like, oh, he's Daredevil again. Like you feel like he's been born again. He's reemerging.
And he's able to smile.
Yes.
Ever so slightly, but it's enough.
Maggie, are you my mother? Of course not, child. A heartbeat can tell you a lot. Hers just jumped. She's lying. And as you point out, Kevin, they don't return to it again.
No.
For the rest of the story.
That's right.
which I think is a brilliant narrative moment. Because
Exactly.
Tantalizing.
Yeah, it's just ambiguous.
Because they could have
but yet-
run that right into the ground,
Sure.
basically.
Yeah.
And it's just there. And then you appreciate their bond. Although you got to think she must have known that he knew. He figured it out.
I truly
Yeah.
believe that. I mean, I felt that when I read the story, but that is what gives you the insight as a reader to, make that significance to their relationship and that reintroduction of those two people.
Murd, I don't want to jump too far. Anything else you wanted to say about these last couple issues we've been looking at? Born Again.
Well, one more quick note about
Please.
Ben Urich. He's talking about Christ allegory here. He's he's Peter the Apostle here. Yeah. Ben Urich denies Matt Murdock 3 times before the
Good
cock
point,
crows.
Murd. I never caught
Wow.
that.
But
Yeah.
then his faith is
that's
restored.
right.
He comes roaring back and becomes like the first pope in the crusade to restore Daredevil and to bring the
Love
Kingpin
it.
down.
Frickin' love it. Good.
Well done, Murd.
I did not.
I've
pick
never
that
thought
up.
about all the
No,
years
I
I read
didn't.
this story, but it makes perfect sense.
That is
that's-
awesome.
Yeah.
See, there you go. Then it's just another.
Testament to the polysemy of this text, just how much new stuff you can dig out of it
Yeah.
with repeated readings.
What I really enjoyed as we get into the next issue, which is entitled Saved, they give us a little bit of light into how the Kingpin's organization functions. It's not like it's just like a mafia family. It's a corporation with a board and investors who are all really like his lieutenants, essentially. And he's having a meeting, and one of them dares to bring up some concerns about, the vendetta with Matt Murdock.
I love that. I love that splash page.
Yeah. Oh, when Matt knocks the
bag off and he's standing there.
He's back.
Jesus,
Yeah.
what a beautiful page.
Yeah, look at that. Look at that.
Oh my goodness.
And what's great about Mazzucchelli's art, the musculature is like that of a real person. Like
Exactly.
someone could be like that. It's not like some overblown steroid. That's what makes him all the more impressive and powerful.
Exactly.
But when the lieutenant brings up the concern, I'm reading from the comic here. Mr. Switzer, this is a check for the current market value of your shares in the conglomerate. Take it or your family dies. You are all dismissed. Mr. Switzer has a weekend in Colorado plan. This is Wesley, his underling speaking.
Yeah.
He skis. Kingpin says, compound fracture, both legs.
And this is where you can see. This is where you can see where Miller. This kind of, for me, like his view of corporate America and the government, which he plays into, Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
His under, like Reaganomics and the political world as well as the business world and how the corruption and such. You can see these underpinnings of what he utilized later on and played more strengths upon. But you can see that he started to, include this in this.
And I'm
storyline.
glad you mentioned that, because when I was reading it again last night, that's one of the selling points that really struck me, was that as this is a very, as you said, uplifting story about the power of the human spirit, but in many ways it's a very damning meditation on certain elements of
society
of the entity that is America.
Yeah.
Essentially, and some of the more, corrosive consequences of sort of this unholy, trinity between business, the military, and the government.
Well, how
which-
they're not separate.
No,
it's
it's if you want a whitewashed flag waving view, this is not the story.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean,
Yeah.
and that's why Captain America's role in these issues we're approaching is so pivotal. But now, of course, in this issue, Ben finds his courage, and we have to appreciate, in the context of the story, what he's doing is incredibly dangerous.
Oh my goodness! Yeah.
I mean, he's already had his hand broken. Look at Matt looking at reading the text of Ben's story. The eye, just amazing, that expression.
I mean, literally, like you said. I mean, he had his hand broken.
Yeah.
He listened to somebody die on the phone who was going to break this story, and and he still decides to go through with it.
Yep.
And
I thought the scene, because again, it's such the graphic intimacy. When he's with, he has a police bodyguard, and they go to his apartment, and Lois is there. I love how she's still wearing the nurse's outfit. By the way,
I know.
because she's trying to. That's how she got into the apartment.
Professional pride.
Yeah.
Yes.
And she levels the cop, who's like a huge man, and then they're fighting, and Doris is being hanged, and it's so sordid, but looks like a tie or something.
Yeah.
From the shower head, and Ben's trying to free her, and you're worried oh God, is he going to get it? Cut it in time with the razor. Like the sequential storytelling here is simply breathtaking, and you feel the tension of that scene.
And when you see Matt show up, it's just like
she doesn't last 1 second.
Oh my God! And I love it. It's just like there's that character. You know what I mean? He showed up just in time and levels her, and I'm just like,
we always have to remember that Daredevil is also a ninja. Literally.
Exactly. Yeah,
So,
you're absolutely. Beyond, actually.
And he's all these other martial arts he's a master of. So that's always brought up. But I love how Ben is Ben's out of shape.
Yeah.
He smokes like a chimney.
He's frail.
Right?
And,
It's the 80s where smoking was still far more around now than it is today in public places and so forth. And he comes out holding the razor, he can't stop Lois, and she's cuffed. It sinks in. Matt, you're alive.
Yeah, he doesn't, he makes sure that Ben doesn't see him. But then I like this when he's hugging his wife and he's like, right in my own home.
Yep.
So it's.
And that shows you the Kingpin's malignancy goes right into the most intimate of people's places, their homes, their bedrooms,
It shows you how he
spouses.
has, the tendrils that he has into every aspect of these lives and how much control and oversight he sees.
Well, he goes to some corrupt psychologist to get this homicidal maniac freed, who they're going to put in the Daredevil costume. And without spoiling anything, Murd, in season 3 of Daredevil, they do kind of riff on that, where someone else does wear the Daredevil outfit.
Yeah.
I won't tell you who.
Yeah.
But they obviously got the idea from this.
Sure,
They kind of put together different plot lines.
Absolutely. But yeah, look at Karen on that page.
I'm glad you brought that up. The scene where Karen, unfortunately, our trades will have different page numbers, but where Karen is with Foggy, and she's looking out the apartment window, her arms crossed, she looks like a corpse.
She does.
Yeah, I mean,
like she's ready.
Well,
to
and
put
she's
into a
going with
sarcophagus.
withdrawal.
Yeah.
I mean, she's
she's vomiting in the commode.
The commode. Yep. Yeah. So, but again, there's Foggy. That's who she called.
That the guy that beat you up? Where? Devil, he will. I'm calling the police. Foggy, there's no fear really. We say Matt's the man without fear.
Yeah.
He's a character unto his own.
Yep. I'm very glad that Miller chose to take him seriously.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's a great. Yeah, it's an excellent point, because sometimes Foggy is the comic relief character, and there's still elements of that here because that's part of who he is. But he goes so much deeper with him.
Exactly.
I remember as a kid, I was struck by the brutality when Paolo just executes the two cops right on the street. And then a full-on gun battle begins raging. The Kingpin has also sent assassins to the scene. And again, we have to remember the role Daredevil, the comic, played in amping up violence and its portrayal in mainstream superhero comics. I mean, it's graphic. And when you think about it, the Comics Code Authority approved this. Here you have a man beating another man to death with a billy club.
Right.
Granted, it's from the back, but wow.
Still. The implication of it.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the cover to issue 231, and I noticed the Comics Code seal is not on it. There's a tiny Captain America head there instead.
Let me look at my cover.
Yeah,
I'm glad you pointed that out. I didn't notice that. Hold on 1 second.
Wow.
See, our trade doesn't have the full indicia on it.
Oh, yeah, it
Issue
doesn't.
230 has the seal, but
Oh, yeah, you're
231 does not.
Wow.
Okay, well that would make sense.
232's got it. And let's see about 233. 233's got it, but 231
Good.
might not have made the
Great
grade.
observation, Murd. Great observation. I never caught that either.
I didn't either. And
Well, now you can
it
understand
makes-
why, you know.
plus, Karen thinks she's going to be killed in the crossfire, so she actually takes a syringe from Paolo. She's going to take one last hit.
Yep.
So they're graphically showing that. And the scene where, think about what she's done to him. And she collapses into his arms.
Well, he saved her.
He saved her.
I mean,
Right?
he you know, again, humanity. I mean,
Yep.
that's
And he forgives her because
He
that's
does.
what Christ figures do.
exactly, and that's what there was a key point. I remember reading that in an article. I think Macchio had stated that about, you know, this is a you know, Frank drove home a point of forgiveness, you know, to show that that's part of being a hero as well, you know. So that's so poignant when you
because
see them
she-
embrace.
Yeah, she was the catalyst for everything that's happened to him here.
Right.
But I love how 80s this jacket is, though. That's a perfect 1980s
That
winter
old
jacket,
puffy.
by the way.
Yeah.
But it shows you just the depth of his nobility. Depth is the wrong word, but just, you know, the extent of his nobility.
Mm-hmm.
He's clawed his way out of this lowest point in his life, and there's always somebody who's lower. In this case, it's Karen.
Yeah.
And he extends a hand symbolically.
Yeah, he saves her life.
To save
Literally
her.
saves her life, and then, you know, they're embracing. That was very poignant.
Murd, anything else you wanted to say about that particular issue? I know your notes are voluminous, so I didn't want to.
Let's sit on it. Let's moving on.
So Kevin, it was either Murd or Kevin. I'm sorry. Who said they felt the story kind of shifted when Nuke was
Mert
brought in?
said that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was my observation.
So that's where we are. We're on God and Country. I love that title. And remember, it's the 80s, so it's Nicaragua, it's
Yeah.
Iran-Contra, like all that's in the... Well, Iran-Contra, I think they hadn't broken out quite yet, but the Contras, all that's in the news. So very topical. And I think it's a valid statement because there is a shift because they're moving towards a climactic confrontation, which isn't going to be between Daredevil and the Kingpin. So they have kind of this proxy figure.
Yep, it's going to be between Daredevil and a very different character who's
Yeah.
just kind of coming on the scene
Yeah,
randomly.
just all of a sudden
in
shows
the
up.
final act.
Yeah.
Who's like the ultimate personification of just U.S. foreign policy
Yep.
gone bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of a brilliant send-up of
yeah.
fanatical 80s right-wing super patriotism
Yeah.
as
Yes.
manifest in warfare, politics, and even pop culture of the
Think about
time.
Rambo, of course.
Exactly, I was just going to say the whole vogue for Rambo-style paramilitarism.
Yep.
But it's you know, Miller is a very gifted satirist.
Yes, he
and
is.
He's in good form here. As I said earlier, this is kind of a step in the direction of what he would do with The Dark Knight Returns. But it's to my eye, it's very incongruous with what he's been doing in the first several chapters.
Does
of
it
the
take you out of
story.
the story?
Not all the way, but it does make me kind of feel like I'm suddenly reading something different.
I can understand. I see your point of view with that. You know, it does kind of take a shift. I mean, it literally, with the way everything has flowed up into the issues before, you know, then all of a sudden you're into this.
It's
you know,
suddenly less noir and more action movie.
right.
I think one way to look at it is the Kingpin is beginning to feel that his plan has not worked. He has not destroyed Murdock. So now whereas Matt was kind of desperate and frantic for much of the story, now the Kingpin in certain ways is starting to come a little bit unglued because he can't destroy this man. And he's been able to destroy everyone he wants throughout his career, including, I think he killed his own father when he was a child, right? Because his father was abusive.
Right.
But he can't defeat this man the way he wanted. So now he's going to kind of go to a more blundering approach.
Right.
By the way, the opening title page where Karen is clearly going through in the throes of withdrawal, clutching Matt, almost biting his shoulder, and she's in her captions describing, you know, how he's helping her and what he means to her, what he means to everybody. She never told them about the senses, meaning when she revealed his identity,
Right.
and she never told them about the man.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
By
it's
the-
almost duplication of that other
Yeah.
panel where the splash page where they're together.
By the way, you know what? I'm surprised this issue got the seal of approval because the scene in the jail cell where the corrupt cops try to kill.
Oh, yeah.
And Urich has to club one of them to death with the butt of a pistol. That's extremely graphic. that whole scene is brutal. I mean, it's appropriate for the story, but
Sure.
that one I think that one did get the Comics Code approval.
It did.
It did.
Yeah, it did.
And again, the narrative where Gloriana's the photographer.
Yeah, that's another kind of sudden shift for that. I mean, Miller, as you mentioned earlier, gives all these characters moments of truth where they have to make major pivotal life decisions. We don't really get to see Glory's decision to do that with her life. I think the last time we saw her, she's still wringing her hands and murmuring to
There's
herself.
a brief moment where
what a horrible city, horrible. And she suddenly loses her Irish accent, too, at about the same time as she becomes a crusading photographer.
And it's funny you mention that, Murd, because there is a brief moment where they have her out in the street, like filming a construction work with a jackhammer, and she's starting to realize, I have an eye. There's like a couple panels.
It's a moment of empowerment for her.
Yep.
But each character has a purpose.
Yeah. And again, the narrative storytelling by Mazzucchelli, the sequence where Urich is trying to fight for his life in Gloriana's and pummeling that corrupt cop to death with the pistol butt, and she's just taking picture, and the clicks.
Yeah.
They create the narrative flow for the panels. It's incredible artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, storytelling is just unbelievable. That's his art is one thing, but his storytelling is another level all to itself.
and Murd, as you pointed out, it's one of my favorite sequences in the whole book. But when the Kingpin dons the persona of the patriotic set upon corporate titan. And he's clutching. He's got like the necktie, like an old Western figure, and he's clutching the flag. And he's talking to Nuke. I'm sorry, you remind me of my own son, a fine boy. He is a veteran.
Yeah, his son is the schemer,
Yeah,
alias the Rose.
Who became a gangster himself, among other things.
Pretty sure he never served.
And then he's overcome, clutching the flag to simply keep some shadow of that dream alive. I must break the law. Excuse me, he's overcome. And now a single man threatens to destroy what we've built. He moves against me. He calls me a villain. I love this balloon. I'm not a villain, my son. I am a corporation in the conglomerate that is America. But as allies in the press, the Nuke just says, the press. And you think about in our political climate now, how the press is often vilified or portrayed in certain ways by different factions.
Fake news.
Yeah. This is a great page. Because the Kingpin is a consummate actor, and he's
Whatever
he may even believe what he's saying because he wants to so be accepted, as you pointed out, Kevin, by the legitimate business world, right? And he wants to bring the and like he said, I've got a general in my pocket now.
Yeah.
So by the way, how great is it when Matt is working at the diner and suddenly their customer numbers go through the roof because of his senses, he knows exactly when to turn the eggs, when to finish the bacon. So now the place is filled with people because the food is so good. Because the cook.
That's excellent observation, Chris. It didn't even occur to me he was using his super senses in that way.
Yeah.
He would have made an excellent chef.
Absolutely.
Murray, it wasn't as important as the apostle Peter reference, but
Yeah.
but that because Ben would go there earlier and he said, "I loved it right here because nobody comes. The food is terrible." Now it's great because Matt's the cook. Now, so Murd, when Nuke attacks Hell's Kitchen, and you get this, like you said, almost this action movie, conflict. How did you react to this as reading it? Too much for you, or?
Well, it did kind of. It increased my heart rate. I found I was flipping the pages a little faster than I had been to this. I found it a little harder to just linger on each panel and analyze it. It's like it almost. This is probably intentional. I think maybe the pacing is supposed to be increasing here because, after all, we are in the middle of an urban assault.
Yes,
that's exactly. Yeah, it's an urban assault, and symbolically as well as.
I think this is some of Miller's strongest scripting of the entire story because, as he describes, the collateral damage. Think about what's happening here. The Kingpin has forged an alliance with a corrupt U.S. Army general who has now brought essentially
He's a killing machine.
A failed offshoot of the Super Soldier Rebirth Project onto American soil.
A one-man army corps,
with a
coin
gunship.
Phrase.
Right.
And they've turned Hell's Kitchen into a war zone. And as Matt is running, what I love about the writing here is, I'll read it to you. It's Matt's thoughts. 3, no, it's 4 blocks away. Bullets cut through flesh and bone. A woman holds her baby close and hears him gurgle. A lung collapses. 3 blocks now, a man chokes at half a name and dies. He senses he's hearing all this. He can't get there in time.
Right.
He's noting every death that's happening before he can arrive. From the gun, a rocket.
So it
a
shows
wino
you
cries to
significance
God.
without having to show
Yeah.
the actual deaths occur.
It's
But
like he's experiencing the lives of everybody in Hell's Kitchen, and therefore has to experience their deaths.
right.
Now, this is where the story for me starts to approach a mythical level when it comes to a confrontation between a heroic figure and figures representing dark forces. When he goes to Karen because their apartment's been hit, she's still alive, and she asks, "Am I dying?" No, honey, everything important to you is safe. And she says, "Safe, I kept it safe." She's holding the costume
Well, that's what I liked about
Yeah.
the previous
Yeah.
issue when she's laying there and
with the costume.
with the costume, embracing the costume.
And now you start to get. I remember when I read this first time, I was like, "Oh, now Daredevil's going to appear." Because you're right, I hadn't seen him in the costume since the first issue. By the way, the drugs that Nuke is on, I'm guessing it's amphetamines, and then the blues and the whites maybe calm him down.
I think that is the way it works, yeah.
Yeah.
The reds are the uppers, the power pills, and then the
Right.
whites and blues.
Did you find the
stabilize
American
it.
flag tattoo too much, or just kind of appropriate for 80s?
It fits what he was trying to establish. You know, what I mean,
It's just as far over the top as it needed to be.
yeah, exactly.
And of course, the last page of this issue is one of the greatest Daredevil images for me of all time.
Yeah.
First time in 5 issues, he's actually in his costume.
Yeah.
But I liked the when you talk about the narrative.
Yeah.
As soon as he talks to Karen, I thought I'd have to be a little more patient than this
Yep.
Kingpin. I thought
You got
I'd have to
sloppy.
wait for
Yep.
weeks, but you got sloppy. I was like, well, that's because of everything that transpired up to this point.
Didn't
so-
work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
So
he was
he-
grasping at straws.
He kind of became the gangster again.
Yeah.
And
Look at
then-
that power of that splash page.
Mazzucchelli's amazing.
He
Like,
is. He really.
and he's in his 20s when he's doing this. I mean,
Talk about again his run on Daredevil. You can clearly see
that progression.
the progression and growth as an artist and a storyteller.
Now we have Max Sheila's colors. I didn't notice this on the last story, Armageddon. I wonder if he's related to someone in the forums. Could probably help us with that.
Yeah, I do
I
not.
wonder if that might be just, yeah, I don't know.
Let me look at the preceding issue. No, it's Max Sheila on God and Country too. I didn't catch that before. I should have though, because I think the whole creative team is so important to this story.
Yeah.
Everybody plays a very important role. It's not a one-note pony here. This also, I think, really establishes that Daredevil is the protector of Hell's Kitchen, and that he will do whatever he has to protect the people in that community. Now, one of the moments that gives me chills, we're in the last chapter here. It's Wesley, who was not as simpering in his TV version as he is in this version. And Murray, you saw the first season of Daredevil, right? So we can talk about it. Okay.
It's been some time, but
Yeah,
I
but-
have seen it.
They established in that first season that Wesley's like his only friend, like Wilson Fisk's only friend, basically.
And doesn't Karen end up killing him?
Yes, she does.
She does. Yeah.
Yep.
To save her own life. Here he's more like the simpering, but trusted underling, because he's speaking to the Kingpin in a way his other lieutenants would not. He
Right.
goes, "Boss, it's getting out of hand. It's all over the news. You've got to stop it." Then all the Kingpin says, "There, did you feel that? Even here, 20 blocks distant, the earth trembles." Like he's in awe of this, like this operatic moment he's created, and that he's set on loose on Hell's Kitchen. It makes you realize like the Kingpin on his balcony with his binoculars, overseeing this mayhem that he's the architect of, and like he's getting off on it in a sense. Like it's the ultimate expression of his
power trip.
power.
Yeah, exactly.
That he's able to do.
Corruption and power.
And I love Matt's. I love Matt thinking about, because we often don't get this with superheroes, how he's going to fight this guy. The captions are him thinking about, okay, this isn't working. Now I'm going to try this, and oh crap, his muscles are made of plastic and all this type of stuff. And I really enjoyed them going into the mind of him as the pugilist and what he has to do to try to defeat this basically superhuman figure.
Well, and it's a way for Miller to use the narrative
Yep.
to bring this character that you never heard or saw of
Yeah.
before and add significance to him and show him how much of an adversary he is, and how it's not just Matt beating up another
regular soldier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this guy is significant. He's not a pushover by any means. He literally is a maniac version of Captain America.
Exactly. And then Wesley is saying, "This is slaughter, boss. This is mass murder. This is war. I've done more than transport it from a South American jungle to Manhattan, to Hell's Kitchen." Essence of the Kingpin.
Yeah, exactly.
The scene where Nuke is falling onto the car, the top of the police car, which is in flames, and again, beautiful use of word balloons here, just of the panic and mayhem in the streets. A policeman calling for help, people saying it's the end of the world, someone's asking for help, and Glory is trying to get the shot.
Yeah. She's getting the shot.
Yeah, and Ben's trying to get her out of the way. and then Ben is again the typewriter font.
Right.
I shouldn't call him Matt. Give the man his due. He's wearing the tights. He's Daredevil, the man without fear.
Yep.
Fear of bullets, of rockets, or fire. When he destroys the helicopter, that always gives me a chill.
Mm-hmm. And he thinks to himself, forgive me.
Because we have to, and this is especially emphasized going forward after these stories, but Matt Murdock is a religious man. Like Matt Murdock, he's Catholic, right? Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, he's Catholic,
so he's just taken a life.
But it's that adage of,
well, he
the
had
life
to be.
of one
the guy was mowing people down on
exactly.
the streets.
Yeah. It's that choice.
But again, up to this point, I remember thinking as a kid, wow, a superhero just killed somebody. Because you never saw that.
No.
Except for like the Punisher, who's not, I don't really call him a superhero.
Right.
And Daredevil did what he had to do.
It's about making choices.
Yep. Which is what this whole story is about.
Exactly.
Now, this is the page. So, Murd, how did you react seeing the Avengers introduced as they were?
Well, let's see. My note reads as follows. Brief cameo by crypto-fascist Avengers.
I almost spat out my soda, ladies and gentlemen.
Slightly resembles Superman in Dark Knight Returns. There we go. Cap especially,
Tremendous.
of course, the soldier, but far more sympathetic and more in character turn for Captain America here than Superman. As you said, it boils down Cap to his essence, where Miller kind of turns Superman's essence inside out. I mean, Cap here, he's portrayed as individualistic and idealistic, loyal to the dream and nothing else, whereas
Not the
Superman's
government,
just a blind authoritarian tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Iron Man in particular, he just, cause Daredevil, that man is ours on federal authority, stand back, you have 5 seconds to comply. And it's, you can tell that Miller eventually got involved with RoboCop later on, because there's
That's right.
Oh, yeah,
kind of an early metallic echo of that here in Iron Man's
point,
dialogue.
Right. Again. Damn it.
Oh, he's always clutch.
I know. I love it.
I love the one-panel portrayal of Thor.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really see him. No one calls him Thor. They just says, a soldier with a voice that could command a god. And does.
Yeah.
And as a Marvel reader, you're like, oh, it's Thor. But the way he's portrayed there, almost aloof, removed from everything.
Yep, I could practically hear a few faint bars of Wagner.
Yeah.
It is.
But it just adds to the strength. What I got out of that is it really adds to the strength of the character of Captain America.
Oh, absolutely.
It just sold that whole, the leader of the Avengers.
Put those fires out. We don't want a gas main going up. And he starts, he gets the thunder, and that's it.
Yep.
The scene where it's one of my favorite Kingpin moments in the story, when the one lieutenant is so incensed at how we've lost drug trade. The guy's saying, sheer lunacy, Kingpin, sheer lunacy. Hundreds of people dead, so he's killed hundreds of people in this melee. If the syndicate gets figured for it, will be in court for months. Please, Mr. Glazer, do not refer to our organizations as syndicate. It dates you. Mm-hmm. Dates me right. Sure, in the old days, we might go for a family, but we never flattened an entire neighborhood. Have you an idea what your vendettas cost us that lost drug trade? Again, I love this kind of this view now into the workings of the Kingpin's organization.
Yeah. Right, and his own ideals of said organization.
Yeah, and how there's all these people who rely on it for their income and how they're all invested in it. And very little is compared to the lost real estate, but please go on, Mr. Glazer. You bet I'll go on, fat man. Honestly, everybody else here is thinking you're screwing up. You've endangered all of us and caused us millions just to harass that blind shyster. Another lieutenant says, Glazer, you'd better ease up. And then and again, this is a tie right back to the Lee years. Crazy, Kingpin. You've been crazy ever since you lost your wife. And now look at the art.
Yeah.
Look, I guess I've been in the bottle a little too. I didn't mean to. I mean, Hell's Kitchen, I put a lot of years into it now. In the 60s, the Kingpin just would have beaten the guy up and thrown him out.
Right.
Here he breaks his neck.
Right.
Barely changing his facial expression
Yeah.
as he does so.
Exactly.
So that's
So-
again, this is what D'Onofrio was drawing on
Yeah.
in his portrayal. You're
And
absolutely
like,
right, Chris.
Vanessa's still there. They don't mention her name.
Right.
But that's still so intrinsic to the character's whole makeup, like the relationship with his wife. And in fact, you may recall, Miller and Sienkiewicz did that graphic novel. I think it's Love and War.
Love and War, yeah.
Which is before this.
We're correct.
Which is all about Vanessa, right?
Yes.
And I think getting her out of the country and all of that.
Right.
So that's I highly recommend that story
Absolutely,
as
yeah.
well. And then of course, I love how Matt is like Foggy walks by him, doesn't even recognize him in the church. It's almost like he's like in a different world or life now than the life he used to be part of. I said, and again, the scripting is fantastic here, where you can already tell that Glory and Foggy are not going to make it as a couple. He's unsure about her being a photographer. She's kind of got a newfound purpose. I should point out, by the way, we mentioned this in our Daredevil Spotlights. I thought they got rid of her character terribly some years after this. They threw out a window.
Oh,
You
yeah.
remember that? I was
Yeah.
like, really?
Yeah.
yeah, they
It's
after
kind of like a cast-off moment. They just killed her.
Another death.
yeah, Miller kind of gave her a new lease on life
Yeah,
here.
she
and it
was a very interesting character.
And then
Yeah.
like subsequent creative teams just forgot about her and then brought her back to kill her. Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying?
Yeah, I thought it was unfortunate.
Yes, it is.
Now, these sequences now were with Captain America. By the way, how beautiful is Mazzucchelli's rendering of Captain America?
I know.
And the description. Yes, this is Matt thinking. No man ever breathed like that. Down the block, in that alley. No, there's his scent. He's moving. You'd never know it from his heartbeat. So steady. There, ran past me. Rattled a garbage can. A little sloppy, but fast. Faster than me. No good, he's got it all worked out. Right around the corner. Leaping so easily. Window still creaks with his weight. 300 pounds at least. His muscles lie about it like hydraulic pumps. They swing him up. Wow.
I love that he did this scene, you know, because he didn't have to do, you know what I mean?
No.
That would have been the end with their appearance.
Yep.
And, you know, and that
This
would
reminds
be,
us the Marvel Universe, the Avengers arrived.
yeah,
But no, because Nuke was wearing the flag.
right.
And then Matt says, you know, like, what do you care? And he says, he wears the flag. Matt jumps away, so I had to notice. Now, this panel, I would almost kill to own this page. Doesn't mean anything to them, thinks the soldier. To them, it's just a piece of cloth. Sometimes I feel so weak.
Yeah.
I remember reading this as a kid going, I was like, wow, like, I understand Captain America now. Like, I didn't until I read this story.
Yeah.
Basically. I love, this is classic Jameson. This is Ben writing. Glorious pictures make it just under deadline. Jameson is so happy he springs for 2 colors. Always the skinflint. Does this remind you of Dark Knight, the ominous government building?
Yeah.
Like this would never really exist. Like it's a black tower with like a huge eagle on the facade.
Right, the Prussian or Teutonic eagle.
Yeah.
Well put, Bird. General, who is this man? Captain, pleasure to see you. Pleasure. Oh, that nonsense. I'm afraid you're not cleared for that, Cat, but it's nothing to. You know all these things. I really wish I could tell you, Captain. Then you know it's nothing to. Wish I could. You know the department holds you in the highest regard. We've always valued your commitment and your loyalty. I'm loyal to nothing, General, except the dream.
As he clutches the flag.
This panel, for me, is the essence of the character.
Right.
I think Miller captured the essence of, like, there's no question Chris Evans read this. No question. He had to have read this because his whole portrayal of the character is his loyalty throughout those movies. Like when he confronts Nick Fury in Winter Soldier, he goes, this is not about freedom. This is about fear. Like he's not the, you know, lockstep. He's not Nuke, right?
Yeah.
He's a critical thinker.
Right.
His loyalty is to the ideals of the country that he's trying to uphold, not to some sordid political faction,
Which, you
what
know,
have you.
You know, in Cap's title, when, you know, they did the whole thing with the government, you know, wanting him to be a minion of the government, you know.
Walker came in as
Yeah,
Captain.
exactly.
Those stories are after this, correct?
I
think
believe
they are,
so, yeah. So,
But
yeah,
that was
they
in
were.
the 80s as well.
Right, but
Yeah.
I mean, it just goes to show you,
Yeah.
and that's what sold this point. You know what I mean? Like Miller, I'm not sure, but I think that is the first kind of hint at the fact that the idealism, instead of just being the patriot, he's always been the patriot.
Yeah. We also remember, though, to be fair, to go back to the Bronze Age, the nomad period that Engelhart
that's
wrote.
right. You're right.
Where he found out, they don't tell us, but it's obvious that's Nixon is the head of the secret empire, and
Right.
his idealism is badly shaken. That's when he becomes the nomad character for a
You're
while.
right.
But-
The man without a country.
Yep. And which was another great Mark Waid story some years after this, too, that title. But this sequence, look how crazed Nuke is clutching his blue pill.
Mm-hmm.
No, give me a red. Sorry, son, it's whites and blues for you for now, that is. And then as Cap ruminates, he breaks into the facility, and he's going through computer records, and he's thinking about the war and the super soldier serum. It's great writing because you get an insight into a man who a lot of his foundations now have been shaken by what he's experiencing. But he's not afraid to try to uncover what's really going on, or even it's going to further, shake what he believes or what he would like to believe. And he realized that Nuke is like an aborted version, essentially, of Project Rebirth and the super soldier serum.
Yeah, he's the only survivor out of 20 other individuals that
Yep.
they tried to have a successful version of Captain America again.
Murd, how did you feel about the way they're using Cap here in this last issue?
Well, as I said earlier, it seems really appropriate to the character. I mean, Miller is not full bore, like cynical, satirical, quasi-absurdism, as he those would kind of become his preferred mode in some things he'd write later on. And once again, I'm going to harp on his portrayal of Superman in The Dark Knight Returns, which is
I'll let you know how Superman Year One is, by the way.
to do that. Thank you, because I'm going to be in my bunker somewhere as far from it as possible. But yeah, Cap is definitely ringing perfectly true in this story. Just to. I'm glad that you're right. Miller did not really need to include any of this.
No, not at all.
But it's his way, I guess, of balancing out, his take on, as I said, 80s ultra patriotism here with something closer to the more beneficent ideal of American nationalism
And I
as
love
embodied by Cap.
Forgive me, Murd. I love Cap trying to contrast the destruction of bombers with helicopters as the soldier thinks of airplanes, the old kind. Then he thinks of egg beaters. It's the sound, army helicopters hovering over the roof. There was something more clean about the planes. They drop bombs that burn flesh and destroy the efforts of generations. So again, that contrast, that the man out of time,
Right.
who's cognizant of almost the absurdity of what he's saying. Like, well, the planes are just as horrible as the helicopters, but that sheen of memory and nostalgia.
Yeah, he's on a similar note as he's sitting there breaking into the databanks about Project Rebirth. He's thinking to himself about what a tragedy it was that the super soldier serum was lost
Because he says then they use the atomic bombs
yeah,
in the war.
they could have
Yep.
won the war with clean hands, and then he realizes that Nuke is a result of that same project,
Yep.
and maybe not.
The sequence where Matt's driving through the rain, I love how they describe how his senses are the havoc they're being wreaked with them because the rain is affecting his ability to use his radar sense.
Yeah, Miller doesn't seem to engage with the radar sense very much in the course of this arc. He does a lot with the standard 5 heightened senses, well, 4 heightened senses, but I guess he just has a hard time putting the radar sense into
and
pulpy prose.
when you get into then, Man Without Fear, you see that he even distances himself more so from that. It's all, when you read Man Without Fear, his emphasis is on the development and
Stick is training him.
yeah, the honing of his senses. That it's an expansion of awareness more so than a radar. So it's, you can see the underpinnings of this. Like you said, there's no sign of, the stereotypical panels that we've seen with the radar. With the circular radar.
Concentric circles coming
Yeah,
from his
there's
head.
nothing like
Good
that.
point.
It all basically, and that's why he emphasizes in the narrative about his senses. So you can see Miller starting to develop that. That's his take on it. His Stick is the one that trained him to expand his senses and expand his awareness and trained him to use his abilities. So it's not so much about him gaining superheroes by the radioisotope. It's training to be a ninja and a peak human being and expanding your awarenesses. I like that. I like what
Well said, sir. And as you mentioned earlier, Kevin, that penultimate page where the Kingpin, they go through the how this is going to come back on the Kingpin now. And again, it's one of the things I love about the story. There's no climactic battle. The Kingpin is still the Lord of Crime. But just a little bit, his power isn't what it once was. His lieutenants respond a bit slower to his commands. He's being shunned by the legitimate business world. The law, he's talking about Matt, at least I took that from him. Murdock, he thinks, and plans.
Yeah. There's a succinct statement of one of the biggest, possibly the single biggest status quo change to come out of this story.
Sure.
Matt is not a lawyer anymore.
And he won't be for quite some time.
Right.
Eventually gets like, look at those eyes, though.
I know.
Kingpin's. Oh, that art is just... God.
Yeah.
That last splash panel, which
Which is-
Mazzucchelli has signed.
Which is the homage to Bob Dylan's Freewheeling album.
God, I didn't even thought about that, Kevin.
That literally is the homage to that
Wow.
album.
I
Yeah,
never
if you
would have thought of
if you
that.
pull up the cover of
No,
the,
you're right.
it's almost identical. Almost identical.
Oh,
That was something I learned.
And I
years
love that
later,
album.
too.
I never even thought. Wait, let me call it up right now. God,
Yeah,
I never
Murdock's
thought
pulling
about
it
that.
up, too, yeah. It literally, when you look at it and side by side compare with it, it's almost literally identical. Which I never put two and two together either. It was something that I don't know. Somebody pointed it out later on, and I went and did I ended up pulling it up and looking at it. I mean, it's
close.
It's so similar. It's ridiculous. It's.
Make love to Elizabeth Taylor. Catch hell from Richard Burton. All right, now.
But it just added a whole another level of appreciation for Mazzucchelli. I was just like, wow.
Plus, Karen's outfit is definitive 80s. That is fantastic.
But so he uses something as an influence that, but doesn't completely.
No, it's not a complete. It's not
plagiarized.
Stroke, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not plagiarized, but it's obviously you can see it based on that.
Kevin. Oh, that was clutch. I
That
didn't
is a
think
great
about-
call.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, what a cool thing.
My name is Matt Murdock. I was blinded by radiation. My remaining senses function with superhuman sharpness. I live in Hell's Kitchen, do my best to keep it clean. That's all you need to know.
See, and you see that he said I was blinded by the radiation, but my remaining senses function. So you can see Miller in the narrative designating that he didn't gain his senses and his quote unquote ability by the radiation. The radiation took one sense away from him. But again, you'll see you saw already that Stick had. Remember that issue 185 or whatever, where his senses went crazy and he had to go in the isolation chamber.
Yes, yep.
And then Stick had to kind of like retrain him again.
Help me, please help me.
Yeah, so you can see that Miller takes that approach to his abilities rather than saying he got superpowers from radiation. He gets away from that cliche that was created throughout the Silver Age of the Marvel universe, where everybody somehow or another got their abilities from radiation.
Come on. Well, they still mentions the radiation in the story,
Right.
So
But it's just that the radiation isotope just stole his sight away from him. And he plays upon the reality that when a human body, you lose one sense, the other ones become more heightened to compensate. So he just plays upon that and expands upon that, and in an essence.
And you're right, because when he's in the tax cab, I think it's the only time they actually mention the radar sense in the entire story.
Yeah.
Basically. Now, we've gone through it. Murd, you have a lot more on that sheet there, so what else do you want to share with us?
Well, I don't.
And CGS Assembled.
I don't. There's not that much. I mean, I don't want to. I'm sure we'll have more to say after this. So I'll bring this up now in the hopes that we'll talk about something else afterwards, because I don't want to end on a downer note. But I can't think that the portrayal of Karen Page in this story is going to age very well in 2019, when a significant fraction of comics readers are women, because Karen does not come off very well.
No,
in this
that's
story.
a good point. Yeah.
I mean, she has some small measure of redemption in the end, in that she doesn't die and that she's not a junkie or a pornographic actress anymore. But I mean, she sets all the bad things in this story in motion. The whole story kind of pivots on the weakness and corruptibility of a female supporting character.
And you know what? That's interesting contrast when you think how Karen is portrayed in the Daredevil show.
Yeah, she's got a bit more strength.
I mean, she still goes through some very difficult choices and situations, but she's a much stronger character, without question.
Right.
And what a great character.
Right,
actually.
not exaggeratedly so either.
No,
not
not
at all.
Not at all.
It's not like the Jane Foster thing, where every female supporting character suddenly has to become a superhero and go out and kick ass for themselves.
Right,
That's not necessary. But what's done with Karen here, I mean, she's crucial to the story. I mean, Miller uses her artfully, but arguably misogynistically, in the way that talking about how the characters are stripped down to their bare essence here. I mean, that is done to Matt in this story. It's also done to Karen in this story. Both of them suffer greatly. Both of them fall just about as far as they can go. And what we discover there through the lens of Miller and Mazzucchelli's storytelling is that at the essence of Matt Murdock's character is this unstoppable force that never quits and always gets back up. At the heart of Karen's character, we have someone who makes terrible decisions and then desperately runs back to Matt Murdock to let him save her again. Like she demonstrates a certain amount of resourcefulness after her final fall from grace, after her decision to sell Matt's identity for a fix boomerangs back on her, and her own life is in peril. She cold cocks and robs a blind man, and then she proceeds to essentially whore her way across North America in the company of this dangerous, sleazy drug dealer, Paolo, just so she can get back to Matt Murdock and ask him to help her.
Right.
She hates herself for doing it, but it's all she can think of to do.
Right.
And it would be better if she could have, in this story, done at least something to undo the situation that she's created.
You and I have always been, and I'm sure Kevin is as well, is fond of the run that Carl Kiesel and
Carrie Nord.
Carrie Nord
Yeah,
did.
Carrie Nord, yeah.
Love that.
She becomes like a radio personality, and she's trying.
I remember that. Yeah.
She's trying to be like. I think she's providing like aid to the community through her radio show.
Yeah.
So that
Like
they
pirate radio.
Yeah, they
figure.
do a lot more with her character in the direction that you're describing. But I think you make a valid point, and it's interesting how the culture changes, context, political, and so forth. This might. Well, I don't know if the story would even be done today in this way, but I think it's an interesting perspective to take, Mert.
I mean, technically, she's born again too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a similarity there, and it shows the association between these two characters and reestablishes it
Yeah.
again.
It's just a much less heroic rebirth in her case.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
Her rebirth mainly serves to amplify the heroism and Christ-like
yes.
nature of Murdock.
Right. But it emphasizes him as a character.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it does. But
all the characters in a way are reacting to Matt's situation, what he's going through,
that's a fair point.
and they're all sort of in a narrative sense serving his rebirth,
Right.
Okay,
so to speak.
Yeah.
a fair point. That's, so a lot of his supporting cast
Yeah.
is just serving to take a backseat to his.
Yeah.
But still, I can see female readers.
Sure.
I completely
In the
understand.
contemporary age,
Yeah.
looking askance at this story for that reason.
Now, as I'm dripping sweat at this point, just
Yeah,
so you know, ladies and gentlemen,
The
whatever-
CGS studio is not very well ventilated
Yeah.
on this July evening, friends.
And
neighbors.
I got to say, but before I forgot, I should mention this at the outset. It's so good to be back in the studio. I haven't been here since December. And I know you and Peter recorded in here for the last magnificent Crisis Tapes episode.
Yes,
that
thank
did.
you very much, Chris. We could have met at Peter's apartment. We could have done it in Stone Harbor,
Yeah.
but we wanted to come back, to the center of the CGS
Yeah,
world
and it's
just
good-
get some use out of this place that we're paying money to rent.
Yes, because we've had some technical issues that hopefully we'll be able to rectify. But since we're all here, we can do it here. But because there's no AC, I feel rivulets of sweat now streaming down the side of my face. And I'm in shape. But, so why don't we go to some closing comments, gentlemen? Just sort of about how we feel. I mean, we can bring in the show a little bit, too, if you want, as well, without spoiling it for Murd. But, Murd, how do you want to kind of lead this story?
I feel like I'd just be echoing my opening remarks if I said any more. But yeah, masterpiece is probably not a misplaced term, Chris. I must admit, this is canonical comics. It's a tremendously influential story. It's got some real literary strength to it. Again, it's never going to be one of my personal favorites, but I can't deny that it's well done, and I feel enriched for having read it at least once.
That's because I know you've never been. I know crime comics have never been your natural,
Not really,
safe
no.
harbor, so to speak. So that's saying something that it affected you as much as it did.
And it's nice to sample some early Miller before he,
Yeah.
kind of learned to love the smell of his own farts, is the way I'm going to put it. Yeah, this is the kind of Miller that I want to have in my library.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, this to me is the penultimate as far as I'm concerned. I loved other stuff that he's done. I loved Sin City. Artistically, as well as, his writing in it. It was just such a great combination. But I mean, what sold me on Sin City was how he developed that black and white, artist impression of that, crime noir, which you see he obviously established in this book. But
And how did you feel, without spoiling it for Murd, how they brought elements of this into the third season of Daredevil.
You know, I was pleasantly surprised, to be honest with you, because when I heard that they were going to, base...
It's not a straight adaptation. in
No,
any
it's
way,
not
shape, or
at
form.
all, which I'm
but
grateful.
I thought it worked, though.
Yeah. What they included was necessary.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say necessary, but was important
Yeah.
and significant. But it wasn't, a reiteration and a
No.
regurgitation of what we see in the printed page.
It couldn't have been.
Well, thank God,
Yeah.
because that's what I was afraid of. I
Yeah.
thought if they tried to do too much, I thought
Yeah.
it wouldn't sell. It would undermine the series of what we, the first two seasons were so great
Yeah.
that I was like, if you try to adapt this into, the TV show, there's the significance would never have carried through because you didn't have the same underpinnings,
I agree.
with Karen being gone for decades,
Yeah.
and such in our time.
But the spirit of the story is clearly there, though.
Yes.
And as you point out, what they established those first two seasons, the way they interpreted this worked in the culmination of the story they were telling, I thought.
Right. And I did, the only thing that I can say that I kind of was a little bit disappointed was that because they set up Nuke in Jessica Jones, I was like, oh, he's gonna show up in this third season
there's
of
no
Daredevil.
Nuke.
And so I was like, I think that was, to me, was like a moment lost. But
And without, again, because I don't want to spoil it for Murray, there are, and Kevin, you'll know what I'm saying, there are moments of the story, though, that they do take directly.
oh, absolutely.
And they work the moments that they take.
Yeah.
Um,
you can when
yeah.
you read this, if you've read it, when you watch the show, you'll easily pick up what they utilized. But yeah, I was grateful that they didn't try to go.
And as we mentioned at the outset of this recording, D'Onofrio's Kingpin.
It's phenomenal.
I remember I was watching, and my wife, she watches some of the shows with me on occasion, and she was in the room, and she turned to me and she said, "He's terrifying."
Yeah.
And she knows nothing about the Kingpin, but he's terrifying.
Well,
Yeah, the third season really sold it. I mean, you got it in before, but I mean, when I watched the third season,
And that's
I was
the
like,
one she was watching. She was watching those episodes with me.
Yeah.
And what she was watching, without spoiling, he was just in a room, just talking, but so menacing.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't attacking anybody or doing anything like that, and it's one of the, I think it's one of the greatest performances out of all of the Marvel stuff that's been done.
like you said, you can clearly see he read,
Oh, without
these
question.
influences that we so dearly covet, and he did his homework, and it shows. And the one scene that I thought, I'm not gonna get into details, but there's with one scene with him and another character,
I know what you're talking about.
and I was that just like blew me away. I was like, it's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Phenomenal portrayal of a character, with an actor basing. You can see the underpinnings that we were used to, and he used that in his performances, but he took it to a level that just,
Here. And so, Murray, when you do get to season 3, having read this, you're definitely going to appreciate.
Oh my goodness! Yeah.
I think I'll be able to
gonna
pick
bring
out
into it.
those
Yeah.
scenes that are
Without
referenced.
question.
Yeah.
So my final thoughts are just that, first of all, gentlemen, thank you for joining me in this, because it was such a treat to go through. We kind of went through the whole story and just to talk about it. And you guys pointed out stuff I missed, like the Apostle Peter.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Which I totally missed.
So here we go. How many times have I read this story, and there's again something new?
You made a great point, Kevin, about how there's not much reference to the radar power throughout the whole thing. I pointed out the diner, right? It's so rich. Every time I read it, I get something new out of it, and it's one of those rare comics. There's a couple others in my life where there's just scenes where just the emotion or the mythic quality just gets me to the point where I almost get a little, like I was getting my oil changed today at my Toyota dealership. So I'm sitting there reading this, and my eyes started to moisten at certain scenes because just the sheer power, the emotional impact of it, and just what these stories conjure up in me, having read this so many times. And I don't want to say it ruins other comic books for me, because that wouldn't be fair, but a lot of times when I'm reading monthly superhero type books, and I enjoy them, but I'm like, yeah, but there's that, and then there's this.
Yeah, exactly.
And man, this is something else. This is speaking to the listeners. If you have not read this story, you don't have to be a Daredevil fan.
Exactly.
You don't even have to love superhero comics. If you just want to read an example of just great storytelling, period, but also of this medium at one of its heights, born again, baby.
Right.
That's what I think it made it so unique for me to read it at the time it came out, because to me it didn't read as a superhero comic.
No.
And that's what I.
And we were too young to fully appreciate.
Sure.
Oh, this is from this inspiration and this
Right.
idea and
Yeah.
these writers, and then you were supposed to appreciate, like Murd mentioned, Raymond Chandler. I read Dashiell Hammett last summer. I read Red Harvest, which was fantastic. I mean, you know what Miller was reading.
Sure.
There's no question about it.
Yeah, I have yet to do that. I should do that. That's something that I would like to do, is just read some of these influences that he.
You'll enjoy them.
Yeah, I think I would. Obviously, I can't see how I wouldn't. But it's another thing that I can do to add another layer for me. So I will check that out.
Gentlemen, as we begin to sink into our own bodily secretions,
We're just
I think we've shot our bolt.
slowly marinating here, but I personally feel honored and privileged to be a part of this discussion with two such specialists as yourselves.
Glad you were able to join us, brother.
Yes.
Thank you. Kevin, thanks for coming, man.
Well, everybody, I'm grateful that we were all able to be here and contribute and revel in such glory, as far as I'm concerned.
Indeed.
So.
All right, I think we've shot our bolt.
All right. Then I'll begin to extract us from the situation. Okay. If you'd like to send us an email, you can do so at comicgeekspeak@email.com. If you'd like to leave a voicemail, you can call 267-702-6642. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @comicgeekspeak. You can go to thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com, the latest URL for our forum, where you can leave some feedback about this episode. Tell us your own experience and your own thoughts on this seminal work of comic storytelling. We'd like to give special thanks, as always, to those who have monetarily supported the show in the past. Really appreciate it. The show would not be what it is today without your help. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.